Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I first noticed something off about the guest room on a random Tuesday night. I walked by the closed door and felt a sudden urge to look inside. I don't remember hearing anything unusual. I just paused in the hallway and stared at that door like there was some kind of pull, like I had to open it. I went in, flipped on the light, and scanned the room. Everything seemed normal. An unused bed, a small wooden dresser, and those thick, dark curtains that hung over the window. But something felt wrong, like the air was tense in there. I stood for a moment, waiting for whatever my gut was reacting to, but nothing happened. I sighed, turned off the light, and closed the door. I thought that was the end of it. Later that same week, I went back in to grab an old suitcase I keep in that dresser. That's when I noticed the curtains. They were swaying a little, even though the window was shut, and there was no fan or AC blowing in that direction. I watched them move for a few seconds. They shifted in a slow, lazy way, but then there was a moment where the folds formed something that looked like a grin. I'm talking about a wide shape with a sort of curve that reminded me of someone smiling. I squinted, then rubbed my eyes. I stepped closer and grabbed the fabric, ready to yank it aside to see if anything was behind it. But when I pulled the curtains apart, there was just the window, locked tight. I felt a strange chill on my neck. I looked around the room, then took a deep breath and told myself I was probably just seeing shapes in the fabric. I let it go, grabbed my suitcase, and left. That night, while I was brushing my teeth, I couldn't get the image out of my head. I saw that smiling shape every time I closed my eyes. I tried to focus on practical things like tomorrow's errands and a bill I had to pay. Still, that picture stuck. I went to bed. I don't usually have trouble sleeping, but I felt uneasy. I tried to ignore it, turned off the light, and drifted off. By the next morning, I'd almost convinced myself I was just imagining things. The day went by without anything strange happening. I got home from work, ate dinner, watched some TV, then got ready for bed. I passed by the guest room door in the hallway again and felt the same nudge as before. It was like the room was calling me. I opened the door, flicked on the light, and stared at the curtains. They hung there, still and heavy, like they'd never moved in their entire existence. I stood for a minute, waiting. No movement. Nothing. I shrugged, turned off the light, and left the room. I felt silly for even looking. But a couple of hours later, I woke up in the middle of the night. Something pulled me out of sleep. I sat up and listened. The house was quiet. It was that deep kind of silence you get when everyone's asleep. I walked to the hallway and saw a faint sliver of light coming from under the guest room door. I never leave that light on. My pulse picked up. I felt my chest tighten and my hands start to shake a little. I reached for the doorknob. It was cold to the touch. I pushed the door open and saw that the overhead light was off, but there was a glow coming from outside the window, like a distant street lamp. The curtains weren't fully open, but they were parted in the middle. They never stay parted on their own. I always keep them pulled together. And now they were shifting again, back and forth, like someone was behind them, messing with them. My spine tingled and my stomach tightened. I stepped closer, heart pounding, and grabbed one side of the curtain. I pulled it quickly, thinking I might catch someone or something. But there was nothing but the closed window. No air was coming in, no breeze, nothing. The entire thing felt wrong. My arms were shaking as I let go of the curtain and took a step back. I felt a cool sweat on my forehead. My chest was rising and falling fast. I backed out of the room, clicked off the light switch, which was actually on now, though I was sure I'd left it off, and shut the door. I stood in the hallway a moment, trying to slow my breathing. Then I went back to my bedroom and locked the door. I couldn't sleep for hours. I just lay there, thinking about what I saw. I tried to be logical. Maybe I forgot to close the curtains properly. Maybe I left the light on. But it all felt off. Over the next few days, I avoided that room. I hated the idea of going back in and seeing those curtains moving like that, forming that weird grin. I tried to keep my life normal. I went to work, ran errands, watched TV at night. But every time I walked down that hallway, I felt this pressure in my chest. I'd glance at the door, and every once in a while I'd swear I heard a soft rustling sound coming from inside. I tried to convince myself it was the house settling or the wind outside, but the wind didn't blow that often, and the house had never made a sound like that before. One evening, I decided to confront the situation head-on. I grabbed a flashlight and marched into the guest room. I turned on the main light, then the flashlight, checking every corner of the room. I moved the dresser to see if there was any vent or draft behind it. Nothing. I checked the window seal. It was locked and sealed tight. I checked the ceiling for any cracks or holes. Everything was normal. The only odd thing was the curtain itself. When I touched it, the fabric felt slightly cool, like it was in a freezer for a while. That made no sense because the rest of the room was at a regular temperature. I rubbed it between my fingers, trying to see if maybe it was damp. It wasn't wet, just strangely cold. After a minute, I dropped the fabric and walked out. I shut the door, feeling more confused than ever. Later that night, around 2 a.m., I woke up again. The hallway outside my bedroom felt darker than usual. I always keep a small nightlight on near the bathroom, but it was out. Maybe the bulb died, or maybe it was something else. I grabbed my phone for light and stepped into the hallway. My phone's glow made everything look pale and washed out. I stood there staring at the guest room door. My pulse was thumping in my ears. I heard a faint sound like rustling fabric. I walked up to the door, pressed my ear against it, and listened. The sound continued in a gentle, steady motion, like somebody was slowly shifting those curtains back and forth. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst through my chest. I decided to open the door. My hand was trembling when I turned the knob. Inside the room, the curtains were wide open. The window was still locked, but the curtains were flapping in a calm, steady rhythm, like they had a mind of their own. I swallowed hard. My throat felt dry. I walked over to the window. The corners of the fabric curled in such a way that they looked like an eerie grin again. It was unmistakable. The shape was wider now, like it had grown over the last few days. I could see the edges of the curtain drawn tight, almost forming cheek lines. I was too shocked to move for a second. Then I reached out and grabbed the curtain with both hands, yanking it so it would hang straight. It wouldn't stay still. The fabric kept moving, sliding through my hands, like there was some gentle push from behind. I tried to force it to stay flat, but it lifted a little, brushing my arms. I backed away, keeping my eyes on it. I felt the hair on my arms and neck standing up. My breathing was shallow. I tried to calm myself by thinking about normal things, like how curtains sometimes shift if there's temperature changes or if air seeps in somehow. But that locked window told me there was no breeze, and it felt like something was manipulating the fabric from the other side. I glanced around the rest of the room, but nothing else was moving. The bed was still. The walls were silent. Only the curtains were alive with that steady sway. I decided to pull them off the rod. I thought if I removed them completely, I could end this nonsense. I grabbed a chair from the corner, positioned it under the curtain rod, and climbed up. My hands were shaking as I reached for the top. I had to tug a bit to get the rings free. The metal hooks jingled in my hand. As I pulled, the curtain moved again, brushing against my arms like it was resisting. My legs felt weak. I kept yanking, ring by ring, until the curtain finally came free. I climbed down and tossed it onto the bed. Then I stepped back and stared at the bare window. The night sky was dark, and there was a distant street lamp glow. Nothing else looked strange. I was sweating, and my heart was racing, but I felt relieved. I thought, that's it. It's gone. I stuffed the curtain into a plastic bag and left it in the hallway. Then I closed the guest room door. The next day, I went to a home goods store and bought brand new curtains. A different color, different texture, completely new. I installed them that afternoon and felt a bit silly about the whole ordeal. I told myself I was just letting my imagination run wild. The old curtains might have been defective, or maybe the rod was loose, causing weird movement. Either way, I figured I was done worrying. That night, though, I lay in bed with a weird knot in my stomach. I couldn't shake the sense that something was off. Around midnight, I heard a noise. It wasn't rustling this time. It was more like a creaking sound, almost like a door hinge. I got up and walked to the hallway. The guest room door was open. I know I closed it. I always close it. My heart started pounding again. I stood at the threshold and stared into the dark room. The new curtains were drawn shut. I reached for the light switch, but the light didn't come on. The bulb must have died, or something else was happening. I raised my phone flashlight. The new curtains were swaying. It was gentle, but clear as day. No open window, no fan. They still moved. My stomach twisted so hard I felt nauseous. My breathing picked up. I approached the window step by step. My palms were clammy. The new curtains kept shifting side to side like they were caught in a slow rhythm. Then they started to form a shape at the center. I saw the folds pulling together. It looked like a smaller version of that grin I'd seen before. My body went cold. I wanted to rip them down again, but I couldn't move. I just stood there, watching them curl in that unnatural way. The grin grew wider, and a slight bulge pressed forward, as though something was trying to lean through the fabric. I felt my throat tighten. I thought I might choke on my own fear. Finally, I forced myself to act. I grabbed the center of the curtain with both hands and yanked down. The rod snapped from the wall, and the fabric crumpled in my grasp. I stumbled backward. My foot hit the dresser, and I almost tripped. I dropped the curtain, letting it sprawl on the floor. My phone flashlight shook in my hand, and the beam went all over the room. The rod clattered to the hardwood floor, making a hollow, echoing sound. I ran out into the hallway, slammed the guest room door, and locked it. My whole body was trembling. I couldn't deny something was happening in that room. I didn't understand it, but it was real. Or at least it felt real enough to terrify me. I spent the rest of the night in my living room with the lights on. Every sound in the house made my nerves jump. When morning came, I finally got up, walked to the guest room door, and listened. It was quiet in there. I opened the door just a crack. Light from the hallway spilled in. The curtains lay on the floor, twisted and bunched up. The rod was broken in 2 pieces. Nothing else moved. The window was still closed. I stepped inside slowly and took a breath. The air felt heavier than usual, like the room was suffocating. I scooped up the new curtains and shoved them into the plastic bag with the old ones, then tied it tight. I haven't tried to hang anything else over that window. I keep the blinds down, but the room is bare. At night, I still hear weird sounds coming from behind that door. Sometimes I walk by and swear I see the blinds shake, but I'm too scared to check. I figure it's better to leave them alone. I don't have any answers, and I'm not sure I want them. All I know is I can't bring myself to get rid of that room. It's part of my house. But I won't be using it again anytime soon. For now, I just try to ignore it, hoping one day the shaking will stop and the shape I saw will fade. Yet every time I pass by, I feel that heaviness in my gut, telling me that shape is still there, waiting. And that's enough to keep me from ever sleeping in that room or putting up new curtains. I never asked for strange sounds when I moved here. I only wanted a quiet place with historic buildings and simple neighbors. But on my first week, I heard that low, drawn-out whistle at midnight. It came from somewhere near my window. I jumped out of bed and looked into the alley. I saw nothing, just old stone walls and a single street lamp flickering against the damp air. At first, I assumed it was a drunk or someone passing by. But the whistle came back the next night and the one after that. It never seemed casual. It sounded deliberate. It made my chest tighten. I started to think about it at work, tapping my pencil on the desk, trying to figure out if I was just imagining things. I'm a regular guy. I work at a small accounting office in the center of this old city. My job doesn't excite me, but it pays my bills. I have a small apartment on a winding street that people rarely use after dark. The walls outside are close together, so you can almost touch both sides of the alley if you stretch your arms out. At night, the air feels thick and cold, even when the weather is mild. My apartment has a broken heater, so I keep a few blankets on my couch. I've learned to deal with it. Every evening I walk home around 10 or 11. The route is long, and I pass through several narrow alleys because it's faster than taking the main roads. There aren't many lights. Most of them are old fixtures bolted to the stone facades and half are burnt out. My footsteps always sound too loud, echoing in a way that makes me feel exposed. About 2 weeks after my first encounter with the whistle, I started feeling watched. I'd be halfway down an alley and sense a presence behind me. My neck would itch, my heart would pound. I'd spin around and see the same emptiness. Tight walls, maybe a cat skulking near a garbage can, or a rat scurrying, but no person. One time I tried to walk more quietly, sliding my feet instead of stepping fully, hoping to hear someone else's movement. No luck. I only heard a distant drip of water from a downspout. The silence made me feel tense. It was almost more disturbing than any noise could be. I told a coworker about it, but he just shrugged and said the city's old, with lots of weird corners, and that I was probably spooking myself. I didn't like feeling afraid of my own neighborhood. So one night I decided to take a different route. I avoided the darkest alleys and stuck to a more open street, even though it took me 15 minutes longer to get home. That night, I still heard it. The whistle was faint at first, but it crept up on me like it was carried by the breeze. My hair stood on end. I stopped walking to see if the sound continued. It did. It moved around me, bouncing off the walls. It sounded closer when I stood still. I can't explain how unnerving that was, just a single low-pitched whistle repeating the same few notes. I looked over my shoulder. Nothing. I tried to see if there was a shadow or a figure near the corner. Still nothing. I forced myself to keep walking. When I reached my apartment building, I turned the key with shaking hands. I tried to sleep, but my mind raced. I pictured an old man in ragged clothes leaning on a cane, whistling as he lurked just out of sight. Then I thought of someone wearing a dark hood stalking the streets with no real purpose. These images felt too dramatic, but the whistle was real. My body knew it was real. That night, my bed felt cold, and I kept checking the window to see if anyone stood outside. I was sure I heard faint footsteps at around 3 in the morning, but I might have been half asleep. By the next morning, I felt exhausted. I had bags under my eyes. My coworker asked if I was staying up late binge-watching TV, but I didn't bother telling him the truth. A few days later, I gathered my courage. I decided to wait in the alley for the whistler to show up. I left the office earlier than usual. I took a quick shower at home to shake off the day. Then I dressed in dark clothes and slipped outside. I stood against the damp stone near my building's entrance and waited. The ground was uneven, and there was a strong smell of mold and old garbage. After an hour, my legs hurt from standing. Then I heard it. The whistle started somewhere deeper in the maze of alleys. I couldn't see anything, but I could hear the first long note. My stomach tightened, and I felt sweat bead on my forehead. I thought about backing off, but I stayed put. I wanted to see the whistler face to face. I couldn't keep living in fear. As the whistle continued, I realized it had a pattern. 4 or 5 notes, a pause, then it repeated. The notes sounded sad. They echoed off the walls. I started walking toward the sound. My sneakers scraped the cobblestones, and I tried to keep my breathing steady. My heart was beating so hard it felt like it might burst. I didn't see anyone ahead. I passed under a weak street lamp, and its light flickered. My shadow moved across the wall. I felt uneasy when I saw my own shape looming beside me. I kept going, turning a corner. Suddenly I saw a silhouette at the end of the passage. It was faint, just a dark outline against the dim glow of another street lamp. My feet froze. I felt my jaw clench. The whistle continued, but now it was clearer, definitely coming from that figure. I shouted, "Hey!" My voice echoed. The silhouette seemed to shift. I took a few steps closer. The whistling stopped. I heard a shuffle, like someone dragging a shoe on the ground. I ran forward. By the time I reached that spot, there was no one. My heart pounded, and I breathed heavily. I looked around. The alley led into two narrow side paths. Both were dark. I listened for the whistle. It was gone. A slight breeze pushed a loose piece of paper along the stones. I picked it up without thinking. It was an old flyer for a local festival, half torn and faded. No clues. I stood there for a while, swallowing the dryness in my throat. Eventually, I headed home, feeling more confused than before. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the moment I saw that silhouette. I replayed it in my head. The shape was about my height. Could have been anyone wearing a dark coat. There was something about the way it stood, though. Like it was waiting. Like it wanted me to see it. I tossed and turned in bed. Eventually, I got up, made some instant coffee, and stared out the window. The alley below looked as empty as ever. I pulled the window shut and tried to calm down. The next day, I caught myself yawning constantly at work. My boss scolded me for messing up a simple spreadsheet. I felt embarrassed. My nerves were shot, and I could barely concentrate on anything except that whistle. A week passed like that. Every night I'd hear the whistle, sometimes farther away, sometimes incredibly close. Once it seemed to come from right under my window. I rushed over, but when I looked down, there was no one. The frustration built up in me. I thought about telling my landlord or calling the police, but what would I say? That someone was whistling in the alleys at night? They'd just brush it off. I started trying to record the sound on my phone, but every time I hit record, the whistle faded or stopped completely. I ended up with useless audio clips of background noise. Finally, one Friday night, I decided to do a more thorough search. I got home, changed into comfortable shoes, grabbed a flashlight, and set out into the labyrinth of streets behind my building. The night air was cold, and I stuffed my free hand in my pocket. My flashlight beam was weak, but it was better than nothing. I made my way through each passage, stepping over puddles and trash. Every few minutes, I paused to listen. My ears strained to pick up the whistle's first note. After about half an hour, I heard it. It sounded like it was coming from an alley near a deserted courtyard. I moved carefully in that direction. My mind raced. I felt my pulse in my temples. I arrived at a small courtyard surrounded by tall stone walls. A single lamp flickered in the corner, barely lighting a battered wooden bench. The whistle was louder here. I tried to pinpoint its origin. My steps crunched on some gravel scattered near the bench. Then I heard soft footsteps behind me. I whipped around, shining my flashlight. The beam caught a figure's outline for a second, but they slipped behind a low wall. I chased after them. My lungs burned. When I reached the spot, I found nothing but a dark corner. I scanned the ground for footprints, but there was just the gritty surface and a few fallen leaves. I stood there, heart racing, listening for that whistle. It vanished again. I felt a chill across my back. I turned off my flashlight for a moment to stand in darkness. I hoped my eyes would adjust, letting me see any movement. I waited. My breath sounded too loud. I noticed the smell of damp stone and old moss. My fingers were sweaty around the flashlight handle. After maybe a minute of silence, I flicked the light back on and slowly retraced my steps. I didn't see or hear anyone. When I got back to my apartment, it was nearly 2 a.m. I collapsed on the couch and tried to calm my nerves. My body ached from tension. The next morning, I woke up with a stiff neck. I made some strong coffee and sat at my small table, replaying everything that happened. I felt tired of this routine. This city has always had secrets. Old buildings, hidden tunnels, closed-up rooms in abandoned houses. People like to tell stories about ghosts or hidden treasures. I never cared for rumors. Now I was living in the middle of something I didn't understand. The repeated whistle, the silhouette, the feeling of being watched. It all felt personal. Over the next few days, I tried to ignore it. I came home from work and put on music as soon as I entered my apartment. I tried to drown out any sound from outside. Sometimes I thought I heard faint whistling through the music, but I told myself I was imagining it. My stomach hurt from stress. My coworkers said I looked pale. I made excuses and said I wasn't sleeping well. They suggested a weekend getaway, but I couldn't leave. Part of me needed to know what was going on. I hated feeling powerless. One night, as I walked down the alley to my front door, I heard the whistle again. This time, it sounded gentler, less intense. My entire body tensed up. I turned the key in the lock and went inside, but I didn't shut the door right away. I stood halfway in my apartment listening. I heard a quiet scrape on the pavement outside. My heart pounded. I stepped back out and scanned the alley. The old street lamp buzzed. A moth flitted around the light. Then I spotted a faint shape near a corner, maybe 30 feet away. I took a few steps forward. The shape moved. It looked like a person in dark clothes. The whistle started again. I felt my mouth go dry, my hands shook. I wasn't sure if I should shout, run, or confront them. I called out, "Stop messing around." My voice cracked. The figure moved toward me. For a split second, I thought I saw a face, but the light was too dim. It was definitely a man. He paused, stared at me, then turned away. He walked down the alley without looking back, the whistle drifting behind him. I stood there, frozen. Eventually, I snapped out of it and ran after him. My heart pounded. I rounded the corner in time to see him slip into another dark passageway. I sprinted, my legs shaking. When I reached that passage, it was empty again. No echo of footsteps, no whistle. The tension in my chest felt unbearable. I realized I was gasping for air. I walked back to my apartment in a daze. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window listening to the outside. Occasionally I heard faint notes of the whistle, like a reminder that he was still out there. My mind didn't wander into deep thoughts or elaborate fears. I just kept thinking, he's real. He's fast. He knows these alleys better than I do, and he's not done. I tried to figure out why he was focused on me, or if he was doing this to other people. I had no idea. In the morning, my head felt heavy. I looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were bloodshot, and my cheeks looked sunken. I realized I couldn't keep living like this, but I also couldn't let him scare me into moving away. This city might be old and cramped, but it's my home. I don't have a better option lined up, so I've decided I'm going to keep looking for him. I'll wait in the alleys again. I'll keep my ears open for that whistle. I'll confront him face to face and demand some answers. I don't know how it will end, but I refuse to hide anymore. I can feel it in my core. That whistle has a story behind it. It's tied to these old stones and these winding paths. And one day, I plan to find out exactly what that secret is. Until then, I'll keep my eyes open, my feet steady, and my nerves ready. If he shows himself again, I won't run. I'm done running. And if he decides to corner me, I'll stand my ground. I'm tired of living in the shadows of this place. I might be just one person against whatever lurks in these alleys, but I'm not backing down now. I moved into this old 2-story house because it was cheap and available right away. I liked the tall windows and the wooden floors. I didn't care about the peeling paint or the old wiring. The layout felt simple and functional. I didn't ask the seller many questions. I just wanted a place to settle down. I figured any problems would be fixable with enough time and effort. The house looked fine during the day. The ceiling had a few spots that needed patching, and some of the walls had cracks. But I didn't mind. It felt like a place I could call my own. The first few weeks were quiet. I unpacked my boxes, placed my furniture in the living room, and set up my bedroom on the second floor. I spent a lot of time painting the walls. The paint smell bothered me a bit, but I left the windows open to let fresh air in. My back got sore from climbing up and down the stepladder, so I took frequent breaks. The electricity worked okay, though I noticed the lights flickered sometimes when I turned on more than one appliance. I told myself I would fix it later. On the first night of heavy rain, I was sitting in the living room. I heard the rain tapping against the roof. The sound was steady at first. I found it soothing. Then I heard a distinct thump from above. It made me pause. I lowered the volume on the TV. Another thump came, then a shuffle. I turned off the TV and listened. I thought maybe some branches or debris were hitting the roof. Then the noise started to sound like footsteps. My heart rate picked up. I wondered if there was someone on top of the house. I felt a rush of adrenaline. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and headed upstairs, stepping carefully. My legs felt tense. When I reached the top floor, I went to the attic hatch. I pushed it open, balancing on a wooden stool. The smell of dust and old wood filled my nose. I turned on the flashlight and shined it around. The attic was cramped. Random boxes were piled along the edges and beams ran across the ceiling. I saw no sign of an intruder. I heard the rain pounding the roof above me. The steps sounded closer now, more like a light scraping. I climbed into the attic and made my way to the small door that led out onto the roof. My shoes crunched on loose nails and splinters. I reached the door and opened it slowly. Outside, the rain whipped against my face. I aimed the flashlight around but saw no one. The roof was slippery, and the wind made it hard to keep my balance. I noticed a few dark footprints on the wet surface. They looked fresh. They led to the edge of the roof, then disappeared. My stomach tightened. I felt cold water dripping down my neck. My mind raced. I tried to see if anyone was hiding behind the chimney or near the gutter, but it was empty. I swallowed hard and stepped back inside, feeling uneasy. I locked the attic door and climbed down. My heart was still pounding. I couldn't sleep that night. Every noise made me sit up in bed. I checked my phone a few times, thinking about calling someone, but I felt embarrassed. I told myself it might have been my imagination. The next morning, I went outside to see if there was any ladder or sign of forced entry. I found nothing. The yard was muddy, and I didn't see any footprints near the walls. The day was clear, and the house looked normal again. I decided to put it out of my mind. I ate a quick breakfast, got ready, and tried not to overthink it. A week later, another storm rolled in. It happened around midnight. I was upstairs in my bedroom. The rain started hitting the windows and roof harder. Lightning flashed. I felt a nervous anticipation. The memory of those footsteps hovered in my mind. I turned off the lights and lay on my bed, staring at the ceiling. About an hour later, I heard it again. Footsteps overhead. They were louder this time, as if someone was running back and forth. My chest got tight. I could feel my pulse in my temples. I rolled out of bed and grabbed my flashlight. I crept to the attic hatch. My hands were shaking. I pulled down the hatch ladder and climbed up, feeling the old wood creak under my weight. My flashlight beam flickered across the dark corners. I didn't see anything moving. I noticed a damp smell, probably from the leaks in the roof. Then I heard the steps again, just above me. They sounded wet, like someone stomping around in soggy shoes. I braced myself and walked to the small door that led out to the roof. My mind raced with questions. If someone was out there, how were they getting in and out? I opened the door and stepped outside. The rain blew against my face again, and I felt my shirt clinging to my skin. I shined the flashlight on the roof surface. Fresh footprints trailed across the wet tiles, the same size as before. My throat tightened. I followed them. They led to the roof's edge, right where the gutters hung. Then they vanished. I didn't see any rope or ladder. I leaned forward a bit to look down, but I saw nothing except water streaming off the house. I felt this deep sense of unease, like I was being watched from behind. I turned quickly, shining my light around, but no one was there. I retreated inside, locked the attic door again, and went downstairs. My heart was racing. My hands were trembling. I dried off with a towel in the bathroom, then stood there for a moment, staring at my own reflection. My breathing was shallow. I left the bathroom light on and sat in the living room, waiting for the storm to pass. I kept looking around, feeling like eyes were on me. I tried to distract myself by browsing my phone, but I couldn't focus on anything. The footsteps continued for another hour. They'd come and go, sometimes right above my head, sometimes farther off. In the following days, I tried to figure out some logical explanation. Maybe there was a loose board that was making noise in the wind. Maybe an animal was scurrying around, but the footprints kept bothering me. They were too large and too clear to belong to an animal. and I couldn't explain how they went to the edge of the roof and stopped. I contemplated getting security cameras, but I wasn't sure where to place them. I also felt uneasy about telling anyone. I feared people would think I was paranoid. I tried to ignore it, telling myself that maybe it wouldn't happen again. The next big storm arrived 2 weeks later. I spent the evening pacing in the living room. I didn't even turn on the TV. I just listened to the rain and waited. The wind picked up around midnight, rattling the windows. A surge of fear spread through my chest. Then the footsteps started again. This time they were heavier than before, like someone running in circles. I jumped to my feet and felt a surge of anger mixed with fear. I wanted this to stop. I snatched my flashlight and rushed upstairs, slamming the door behind me. My heart pounded as I climbed the attic ladder. My jaw was clenched tight. I opened the attic door to the roof and shouted, "Who's out here?" The rain drowned out my voice. I could see footprints leading in a circle, then heading to the edge again. I shouted louder, demanding the person show themselves. No one answered. I felt that same creeping sensation that someone was standing right behind me. I spun around. Nothing. My flashlight beam shook. The storm felt aggressive, throwing water at me from every angle. My hair stuck to my forehead. My eyes stung from the rain. Every nerve in my body told me to get back inside. I rushed to the door, slid inside, and locked it. I spent the rest of the night sitting by my bedroom window, gripping a crowbar. I kept the flashlight in my hand. Every noise made me flinch. My stomach was in knots. My eyes darted from corner to corner. I didn't see anyone inside the house, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wanted in. Something was on that roof, walking around, leaving wet footprints, and watching me. The storm eventually died down near dawn. I felt exhausted and shaky. I barely got any rest. By the time the sun came up, I felt frustrated and tired. After that, I sealed the attic door from the inside with nails and a board, hoping to block it. I also installed a motion sensor light on the roof, though it was tricky to position it. I did it on a dry day, climbing up there with a drill and some brackets. I tested it a few times, shining it on different parts of the roof to see if it would catch movement. It seemed to work. I felt a little better for a few days, but I stayed on edge whenever the weather forecast mentioned storms. The final storm in this sequence came about a month after I moved in. It was late at night, around 2 in the morning. Thunder rumbled so strongly it shook the windows. Rain battered the roof nonstop. I lay on the couch in the living room, too anxious to sleep in my bedroom. My eyes were closed, but my senses stayed alert. I felt my heart jump when the footsteps returned, louder than ever, as if someone was stomping with anger. The motion sensor light must have come on because I saw a faint glow through the attic hatch. I froze for a moment. My body felt cold. My pulse hammered in my ears. I told myself that if someone was up there, the new lock and board would keep them out. But the stomping continued for a while, then shifted across the roof. I heard what sounded like scraping near the gutters. My mind filled with images of someone prying open a window or trying to climb down. My gut tightened. I rushed upstairs, taking 2 steps at a time. I flipped on every light as I went. The hallway light flickered, making my nerves even worse. I reached the attic hatch and noticed it was still sealed. I heard the motion sensor light clicking on and off above me. The footsteps moved across the roof. I pressed my ear against the hatch. My breathing was shaky. My shirt stuck to my back from sweat. I heard the water dripping through the roof and the shuffle of feet overhead. Then there was a pause. A long pause. I stood there stiff, not sure if I should open the hatch or stay put. I felt my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Suddenly I heard a heavy thud. It sounded right above the hatch. My legs went weak. I clenched my fists and forced myself to speak. "Go away!" I yelled. No response. The silence dragged on for a few seconds. Then slowly the footsteps moved again. They wandered to the far corner of the roof and faded into the storm. I stood there for at least 5 minutes, breathing hard, waiting for them to come back. They never did. Eventually I went downstairs, body tense, eyes scanning every corner. I tried to calm my breathing. The next morning, I checked the roof at sunrise. The footprints were there again, leading from the attic door area to the edge. The motion sensor light was intact, the nails were in place, and the board was still tight. There were no signs of forced entry. I walked along the roof carefully, my shoes squeaking on the wet tiles. The footprint stopped at the very edge. My stomach twisted in knots. I stood there looking down at the ground below. It was slick with rainwater. No ladder, no rope, no platform, just empty space. Now I live with that tension every time dark clouds roll in. The house still feels like a good deal during daylight, but when the rain starts up at night, I brace myself. I haven't solved the mystery. I've tried everything I can think of. Locks, boards, lights, and searching every inch of the attic. But the footsteps keep returning. They sound heavier each time, and they always leave footprints. I can't see who's doing it. I can't catch them in the act. All I can do is wait. I sit here, flashlight and crowbar at my side, listening to the rain on the roof, and I feel that gaze on me. Every storm, I wonder if this is the night when those footprints will finally cross the threshold and make their way inside. And it keeps me awake, wondering what else I'll find in the morning. I heard the second set of footsteps on my first night here. I remember standing on the balcony, my hand resting on the old wooden railing, trying to get some fresh air after a long day. The boards under my feet creaked softly, and then I heard something else. Another creak, like a delayed echo of my own movements. At first, I thought it might be the wind, or some loose piece of wood settling, but the sound matched my steps too closely. I felt a slight chill at the back of my neck, but I tried to ignore it. I live alone in this house. It's not large, but it feels that way because of the wide yard and the tall trees surrounding the property. The balcony faces the backyard. During the day, it's peaceful out there. I can see the sun filtering through the trees and I hear birds calling in the distance. But at night, the atmosphere changes. The woods get darker than anything I've ever seen. The rustling leaves sound louder, and the old boards on the balcony seem more fragile. My second night here, I went outside again around midnight. I had this idea that maybe facing the balcony at night would help me get used to the place. I took a flashlight and stepped outside. The first step was normal. The second step was normal. Then I paused, waiting to see if I could catch the second set of footsteps. My heart pounded. I stood there, and the flashlight shook in my hand. After a few seconds, I heard a slight groan of wood under my left foot. I was barely moving, so I wrote it off as nothing. But then, I heard it again, behind me. It sounded like someone else adjusting their stance. I spun around, pointing the flashlight in all directions. The balcony was empty. There was only me in the dark. I was sweating, even though the air felt cold. My stomach felt tight, and my breathing turned shallow. I looked down at the floorboards, trying to see if maybe one was loose. I tried stepping in different spots. Sometimes the wood made a noise, sometimes it didn't. There was no clear pattern. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was someone else there. I leaned on the railing and stared at the yard for a few minutes. I heard some rustling in the bushes, but couldn't see much beyond the reach of the flashlight. Eventually, I walked back inside and locked the door. I spent the next few days focusing on ordinary chores. I unpacked my clothes, organized my furniture, and tried to settle into a routine. During the day, everything felt normal. I even stepped onto the balcony a few times with no issues. The wood creaked in a predictable way, and I heard no second set of footsteps. I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. Then a week later, on a full moon night, I stepped out on the balcony again. I wasn't planning to stay long. I just wanted to close some loose shutters and maybe look at the moon for a moment. The second I placed my foot on the first board, it creaked under me. Then I heard a distinct creak behind me. My pulse jumped, and I froze. The moonlight lit the entire balcony in a pale glow. I glanced around. I saw the rail, the door, and the empty space. My eyes landed on a spot in the corner where the wood looked darker than usual. I heard a faint whisper, like 2 or 3 voices speaking in low tones. I couldn't make out words. It made me feel like I was eavesdropping on a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. I stood there holding my breath. The conversation faded, then returned. I felt my hair stand on end. My mouth went dry, and I held the balcony door open behind me with my foot just in case. Part of me wanted to turn around and get back inside, but I couldn't move. I felt like something was right beside me, staring out at the yard. My shoulder tensed up as though someone was standing there, close enough to touch me. After maybe 10 seconds, the whispers stopped. I took a deep breath and slowly backed into the house. Once I was safe inside, I slammed the door and locked it. My legs shook. I dropped onto the couch in the living room and tried to make sense of it. I told myself that old houses can make weird sounds. I reasoned that the wind might have carried voices from somewhere else. But deep down, I felt certain there was more to it. I turned on the TV to block out the silence and stayed awake for hours, glancing at the back door every now and then. Over the next few nights, I avoided the balcony. I closed the curtains and stayed away from that side of the house after dark. But curiosity kept nagging at me. I wanted to understand what was going on. On the fourth night, I decided to test the sounds again. I picked 2 a.m. because it was quiet outside and I could hear things more clearly. I walked to the door leading to the balcony, put my hand on the knob, and hesitated. My palms were sweating. My heart felt heavy. I opened the door and stepped outside. The wood groaned under me. Almost immediately, I heard a second groan, not quite in sync with mine. It was close by, like someone else was pacing behind me. I turned around fast. Empty space. I reached for a flashlight I'd clipped to my belt. I shone it along the floor, checking every corner. Nothing. I swallowed hard, then moved forward a few steps. The boards squeaked in front of me, and again I heard that echo. My skin crawled. I smelled something faint like old wood and damp air. I heard a soft clink, as if glass touched wood. It came from the far end of the balcony. I focused my flashlight there, but I only saw the rails and a small table I hadn't moved yet. The table was empty. No glass, no cups. But I heard the sound again, a small clinking noise. I felt short of breath. My grip on the flashlight tightened and sweat trickled down my temple. In the silence that followed, I caught a brief, muted shuffle of feet. It sounded like 2 people moving around each other. My eyes darted around, but I saw no one. My body felt tense. My neck and shoulders ached from how rigid I was. Then everything went quiet for a few seconds. My breath was the loudest thing in the air. Before I could process any of this, I heard the whispers again. They sounded right next to me. I dropped the flashlight in shock. It hit the floor and rolled away. The whispers faded into a low hum, and I felt a slight breeze, even though there was no wind. My eyes started to water from the stress, and I clutched the railing. I stayed there, staring into the dark yard, waiting for something to show itself. My thoughts raced. I imagined silhouettes coming toward me. I wondered if I'd see shapes in the moonlight. But the yard was empty. The only movement came from the trees swaying gently. After a minute or two, I slowly crouched and grabbed the flashlight. My hands were shaking so badly that I had trouble picking it up at first. I switched it off, deciding that it wasn't helping. In that moment, I just wanted to leave. I rushed back inside, slammed the door, and double-checked the lock. My breathing was shaky, and my shirt clung to my back. I couldn't sleep that night. In the mornings, the balcony seemed harmless again. The wood felt sturdy under my feet. The air smelled fresh, and the sun made the boards warm. I tried stepping around to see if anything would happen, but there was nothing unusual. No footsteps, no whispers. It was just an ordinary wooden balcony, but at night it turned into something else. It felt alive, or maybe haunted. I'm not sure which. I started looking around for clues. I checked old papers that came with the house. I found a few maintenance records, some receipts for repairs on the roof, and a note from a past owner about the balcony needing replacement. I didn't see anything about strange occurrences or unexplained noises. I looked under the balcony, thinking maybe there was some structural damage that caused weird echoes. I didn't see anything significant, just the usual support beams and cobwebs. Every night, the second set of footsteps kept returning whenever I stepped outside. Sometimes I heard them clearly. Other times it was just one extra squeak or a small shuffle. The nights with a bright moon were the worst. That's when I heard the whispers, like distant conversations in hushed tones. They got under my skin. I couldn't make out specific words, but the tone felt intimate and urgent, as if secret plans were being discussed. The whole situation made me anxious. I became jumpy during the day, too. I'd hear a door creak inside the house and my heart would pound, expecting more sounds that didn't belong to me. One evening, I tried a different approach. I brought a chair out onto the balcony before sunset, hoping that if I was there from dusk into the night, maybe I could observe the transition. Around 6 p.m., the sun lowered behind the trees, and the temperature dropped a bit. I sat in the chair, sipping water, looking at the trees. Nothing happened for a while, but as the sky darkened, I started to feel tense. The wood beneath the chair legs groaned once, and I heard a second groan a moment later. My hands gripped the arms of the chair. My pulse sped up. A breeze came through, and the branches above me rustled. At that point, everything felt heavier. I waited, barely breathing, listening for footsteps or whispers. The air got colder, and I felt goosebumps on my arms. About an hour after sunset, I heard the first whisper. It was quiet, like someone speaking from several feet away, but there was no one else on the balcony. I stood up, causing the chair to scrape against the floor. Again, I heard a delayed scrape, like another chair being moved at the same time. My stomach flipped. I reached for the balcony door but paused, wanting to see if anything would show up. I called out, "Hello?" My voice sounded shaky, and I hated how desperate it felt to say something. The whispering stopped. Then I heard the boards creak behind me. 1 step, 2 steps. I felt warmth on my neck, as if someone was standing inches away. My breath came faster. I spun around, but there was only the empty space and the wooden railing. When I turned back to the door, the handle rattled on its own. It moved once, then stopped. I froze in place. My mind went blank except for a single thought. Get inside. I walked to the door, opened it, and stepped in. I locked the door, yanked the curtains closed, and dropped onto my couch. I could still feel that sense of someone standing next to me, as though the presence stayed behind when I moved. My shoulders and neck were so tense they ached. Now I avoid the balcony after dusk. I keep my curtains drawn. When the sun sets, I turn on every light in the house and try to distract myself by reading or watching TV. Some nights I hear creaking out there, even though I'm not standing on the boards. It sounds like slow footsteps moving back and forth. Once I heard that low murmuring for nearly half an hour. I sat in the living room staring at the door, my heart pounding the whole time. Eventually it stopped. I haven't tried to record it or anything like that. Frankly, I'm afraid to listen to it later and realize how real it is. I don't know if there's some logical explanation. Maybe there are structural issues that cause those noises. Maybe I'm catching faint sounds from the neighbors, and the echo of my footsteps is just some bizarre acoustic trick. But late at night, when I hear the second set of footsteps and sense that presence next to me, logic doesn't help. My chest tightens, and all I want is for morning to come. I tell myself I'll figure it out eventually, but deep down, I'm not so sure. All I know is that when night falls, the balcony isn't just a balcony anymore. It feels like something else entirely, and I can't bring myself to stand out there alone. I stepped into the old conservatory last night carrying my worn piano bag and a small flashlight. The front doors were locked to the public, but the manager gave me a key when I agreed to rent that forgotten rehearsal hall. I needed privacy. I needed a place where no one would disturb me. As soon as I entered, I smelled stale air and something like damp wood. The hallway lights were off, so I used my flashlight to guide me. My footsteps echoed against the stone floor, reminding me how quiet it was. I reached the main hallway, found the old practice room, and unlocked the door. The hinges groaned. I felt like I was stepping into a place that hadn't seen people for a long time. I'm a pianist by trade, but my finances are tight. I can't afford a fancy studio right now. This place is cheap, and it's big enough for me to practice with real focus. The room has a large stage and a few chairs stacked in the corner. Everything looks dusty, and there's a thick layer of dirt on the windows. I saw a grand piano in the center of the stage. I set my bag on a chair, pulled out a rag, and wiped the piano bench. The corners of the bench had torn upholstery and the wood looked chipped. It didn't matter. I just wanted to play. I pulled the cover off the piano keys. The piano was old, but it seemed functional. I pressed a few keys. The notes were uneven in volume, but they sounded decent. I started to play a simple scale. My fingers felt stiff from the cold air in that hall. I breathed out, noticing my own breath was visible. I zipped up my jacket. The place had no heating, or at least it wasn't on. I played a few more scales to warm up. At first, everything was normal. My mind was on my technique, how my wrists were positioned, and how quickly I could go up and down the scale without losing clarity. Then I felt a sudden chill on the back of my neck. It felt like an icy draft from a window, but I had closed the door, and there were no windows open. I paused and glanced around. The dust in the air looked still. I shrugged it off and continued playing. A few minutes later, I started on a piece that requires delicate touch in the higher register. When I hit a certain note, the temperature dropped again. It wasn't a gentle drop. It felt like stepping into a freezer. My arms tensed. My fingertips felt cold even though I was wearing a jacket. I looked behind me again. No one was there. I tried to ignore it. I kept playing, thinking maybe there was a broken vent somewhere or a gap in the door. But as I played that same passage again, my fingers brushed the same keys and I heard another sound like a quiet scuff behind me. It was a quick sound, almost like a shoe scraping the floor. I stopped playing and twisted my body around. I shone my flashlight toward the chairs. They were all still stacked. Nothing had moved. I exhaled hard, feeling my heart thumping, and turned back to the piano. I started playing again. My focus drifted in and out because I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. On the next run-through, I heard the piano go out of tune on a note that was fine a moment earlier. It sounded like a sudden distortion. I released the key, but it rang out for an extra second. I pressed the key again and it sounded normal. I lifted my foot off the pedal to be sure I wasn't causing any weird resonance. The note was normal now, so I tried the entire passage again. This time, I felt a slight movement on the bench, as if someone had settled next to me. I froze. I reached down with my left hand, patted the edge of the bench, and felt nothing unusual. I was alone. The feeling disappeared. My heart was racing. I decided to take a short break. I walked across the stage and grabbed my water bottle from my bag. My hand was shaking when I took a drink. I could taste the dryness in my throat. I tried to calm down by walking around the hall. The walls were covered in old photos and announcements for recitals long past. I examined a framed certificate for a teacher who used to work there. The dates were from decades ago. The glass on the frame was cracked. After a few minutes, I went back to the piano. I needed to practice. I forced myself to ignore any strange feelings. I started playing a piece I've been working on for a recital. The music requires shifting dynamics and delicate pedal work. I focused on my technique, measured my breathing, and tried to keep my eyes on the keys. Then, in the middle of a soft passage, I felt something cold brush against my neck. It wasn't a breeze. It felt like fingers. My entire body tensed and I lost control of the pedal. The chord I was holding broke apart in a messy sound. My head jerked around, but there was nobody. The chills crawled up my arms. I stood up quickly and looked around. I walked down the steps from the stage and scanned the entire hall. The corners were dark, but my flashlight showed me rows of seats, dusty curtains, and the exit doors. Nothing else. I tried to laugh at myself. Maybe I was imagining things. But I couldn't deny that the temperature felt colder in certain spots near the piano. I returned to the stage, my heart still pounding. I decided to keep playing, thinking maybe I was letting my nerves get the best of me. I played a more robust piece, something loud and energetic to drown out my worries. But as soon as I reached the middle of the composition, The notes on the piano sounded off again. It was like the pitches had shifted a fraction of a half step. It was subtle, but enough to make the melody sound clumsy. I slowed down, pressing the notes carefully, checking each pitch. Everything returned to normal. I rubbed my temples and sighed, thinking the piano needed repairs. Then I heard a faint whisper near my ear. I couldn't make out words, just a single breathy sound. My skin crawled. I got up and backed away from the piano bench. I paced around the hall, shining my flashlight at the corners and behind the stage. I found nothing. I turned off the flashlight to see if maybe I could catch a glimmer of movement in the darkness, but it was pitch black except for the small emergency light near the exit. I stood there breathing fast. My lungs felt tight. My head was pounding. After a moment, I pulled my phone out of my pocket. There was no service in that old building. The battery was still half full. I thought about leaving, but I needed the practice time. I also felt a strange curiosity. Something in that place drew me in. I went back to the piano, took a seat, and started playing a slow, calm piece. The first minute felt normal. I relaxed a bit, focusing on my posture and my expression. But then the temperature around me dropped again. My breath was visible. My eyes stung from the sudden cold. My hands started to feel stiff, but I pushed through it. I was determined to play. That's when I heard another noise, like a low moan coming from under the stage. I stopped immediately and pressed my ear to the side of the piano. I heard nothing else. I stood up, walked to the edge of the stage, and knelt down. There was a small gap beneath the wooden boards. It was too dark to see anything. I tapped the floor. The sound was solid, but I felt a strange draft. It made my eyes water from the cold. I turned back to the piano and noticed the keys were pressed down on their own. It was just one key, a high note. It was held down as if someone was pressing it softly. I didn't hear the tone, so maybe it was just stuck. I moved closer and lightly touched the key. It popped back up. My legs felt weak. I sat down on the bench, trying to gather my nerve. My fingers hovered over the keys. I decided to play that note. The instant I pressed it, a wave of cold air rushed around me. My teeth began to chatter, and I felt something like pressure on my shoulders. I forced myself to keep pressing keys, building a slow melody, trying each note to see if the phenomenon would repeat. As I got deeper into the melody, I started to feel less anxious. It was as if the music was guiding me. Then something weird happened. My hands moved on their own. I knew the piece I was trying to play, but the notes coming out were different. I tried to stop, but my fingers kept going. My heart pounded. I tried to lift my hands, but they felt stuck to the keys. My palms were sweating. The notes formed a pattern I didn't recognize. The chords sounded dissonant, but they flowed in a strange sequence. My wrists ached from the force pressing them down. I gritted my teeth and yanked my hands away. The music cut off abruptly. My arms burned. I jumped up, breathing hard. The air felt less cold now. I touched my wrists. They were tense, and my fingers were shaky. I walked around the stage, trying to catch my breath. I wanted to leave, but my bag was on the stage, and I was still curious about what was happening. I thought maybe I could gather some proof. I pulled out my phone, switched it to video mode, and set it on the piano, aiming at the keys. I decided to record myself playing. Maybe I could catch whatever was happening on camera. I started playing a simple sequence, something repetitive that would let me focus on the environment. I repeated the same progression over and over. My phone screen glowed, showing me in the frame. After a minute, I felt that familiar chill. I saw my breath turn to fog in front of me. I kept my eyes on my phone screen. I noticed a faint shadow behind me. It flickered for a moment, then disappeared. My heart hammered, but I kept playing. Suddenly, one of the notes changed pitch on its own. I watched my hands on the screen. They were pressing the correct keys, but the sound was warped. My adrenaline surged. I pressed harder, and the entire chord went flat for a second, then popped back to normal. That's when the phone froze. The video feed flickered, and my phone's screen went black. I snatched it up, tapped the power button, but the phone wouldn't turn on. The battery had been at half. I cursed under my breath. I set the phone aside. My arms were tingling. My head felt light. I grabbed my water bottle and took another drink. I felt a chill in my stomach, like I was on the edge of something beyond my control. I decided to locate the source of this cold. I walked around the stage, stepping carefully. I ran my hand along the stage curtains. They were damp and smelled musty. I walked to the back of the hall near a small storage closet. The doorknob was rusty. I tried turning it, but it stuck. I pulled harder, and the door opened with a creak. The smell inside was strong, like wet cardboard. There were old music stands stacked up, some battered chairs, and a broken mirror leaning against the wall. I shone my flashlight inside. The air felt thick, but it wasn't as cold. I didn't see anything out of place besides normal junk. I closed the door and returned to the piano. I felt this odd pull, like I needed to sit and play again, even though I was scared. My stomach was in knots. My pulse was racing. I sat down and placed my hands on the keys. I tested a few notes, waiting for that drop in temperature or that odd presence. Everything was quiet at first. Then a gust of cold air hit my back, and my shoulders tensed up. The black keys felt icy under my fingertips. I heard a faint whisper behind my left ear. My breathing got heavy. I pressed down a chord and the sound vibrated strangely. The top of the piano rattled for a second. I saw the lid shift slightly, like someone had bumped it. I kept playing, building a simple tune. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. As I played, the chords started to shift on their own again, my muscles locked. The melody twisted into a pattern that felt unfamiliar. I closed my eyes for a moment, and I felt my body swaying. It was like a trance. My mind felt cloudy, but I kept playing. My breathing grew shallow. My skin felt numb. I realized I was no longer in control of the piece, yet I couldn't let go. My arms shook as they moved across the keyboard. The music rose in volume, even though I was barely pressing down on the keys. It sounded deeper, more resonant, as if extra hands were playing along. Then I heard a distinct voice. It was quiet, but clear. It said my name. My heart jumped. I stopped playing and turned around so fast I almost fell off the bench. There was no one there. My sweat dripped down my forehead. I tried to catch my breath. The hall felt completely still, except for the pounding in my chest. I stood up, grabbed my phone, and shoved it in my pocket. I packed up my rag, closed my piano bag, and decided I'd had enough. I left the stage, locked the door behind me, and walked back through the dark hallway. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see something following me. Nothing moved. The silence felt heavy. My mind was racing with questions, but I couldn't stay another second. I reached the front door, turned the key, and stepped out onto the street. The cold night air felt good on my face. My breath shook as I exhaled. I plan to return, though. I can't explain why, but I need to go back. Something in that place calls out through the notes. I want to see if I can communicate with it. I want to find out what's lurking in that old conservatory. I'm not sure I'll ever fully understand, but I've made up my mind. I'll go back tomorrow night. I'll try to capture more evidence. I'll try to figure out if there's a presence that wants to speak through the music. My hands shake when I think about it, but I can't walk away from this. I have to know. I had just dragged my last box into that cramped apartment when the landlord pulled me aside, face tense, and told me, "Never close that window all the way." He pointed at a small window in the living room. I saw flaking paint, warped wood, and a latch that looked like it could snap with a slight push. It seemed ridiculous. A draft crept in whenever I walked past the sill, blowing dust onto the worn-out floorboards. I nodded and pretended I would follow his instructions, but I was already thinking about how to keep the draft out. On my second night, I got tired of the annoying breeze. I twisted the old latch and locked the window shut. It made a gritty, scraping noise, like it hadn't been moved in years. I didn't feel guilty, I just wanted to sleep better. The landlord's warning felt like old superstition. I remember patting the window once as if to say, "That's that." A few hours later, I was in bed, half asleep, when I heard loud thuds. They came from somewhere near the window. At first, I thought maybe it was the neighbor's door slamming, but it kept happening in a steady rhythm, like someone was knocking frantically. Thud, thud, thud. The sound made my heart pound against my ribs. I was disoriented. My bedroom door was closed, so I couldn't see into the living room, but I could hear something banging against wood. Thud, thud, thud. I sat up, my pulse thumping in my ears. My mind raced. I knew it came from that damn window. I threw off the covers and rushed to the door. The banging got louder as I moved down the hall. My mouth felt dry, and my arms were rigid at my sides. I grabbed the doorknob, turned it slowly, and stepped into the living room. The darkness was thick, but I saw the window wide open, slamming itself against the frame as wind gusted in. The glass rattled. It looked like someone or something had forced it open. I flipped on the overhead light. The old lamp in the ceiling flickered for a second before glowing weakly. The window kept banging, but there was no one else in the room. I took a few steps closer, and every muscle in my chest tensed. My pulse felt like a drum in my ears. I could feel a tingling on the left side of my chest. My breathing was short and quick. The air blowing in was cold enough to make me shiver. I grabbed the window frame and tried to pull it shut. It stuck for a moment, then gave in. My heart thumped with fear, but I managed to get the latch back into its original position, half open, just the way the landlord wanted. The banging stopped immediately. The sudden silence made my skin crawl. I didn't sleep well for the rest of the night. I kept hearing echoes of that pounding in my head. The next morning, I woke up with a dull ache in my temples. I felt like I barely got any real rest. The landlord was nowhere to be found, so I decided to ignore the whole thing for a while. I just made some coffee and tried to brush off the weird experience. I told myself it must have been the wind. The frame was probably too weak to stay locked. Part of me wanted to forget about it, but I couldn't. I spent the day stocking my kitchen cabinets, cleaning the old counters, and wiping off the grime on the windows. Yet I kept glancing at that small living room window, half expecting it to slam open on its own. When night fell, I went to bed earlier. I felt an uneasy tension in my shoulders. The place seemed quiet, but I couldn't shake the memory of that banging noise. I tried reading a magazine, then scrolled through my phone, but my hands wouldn't stop trembling. Around midnight, I heard a soft creak from the living room. It was just the building settling, I told myself. But the tension in my chest returned. I forced myself to lie still under the covers. The night dragged on, and I eventually drifted off. In the morning, I went to the window to check if everything was normal. As soon as I got close to it, I felt that same tingling in my chest, like an electric current. I tried to ignore it, but it wouldn't go away. I opened the window fully to let some air in, thinking that maybe I just needed fresh airflow. As I looked outside, I had the oddest feeling that someone was there, watching me from the other side. But I live on the 4th floor, so there was just a drop to the courtyard below. Yet I swore I saw a shape, like a dark form near the brick wall. It was gone in a blink, leaving me with goosebumps up my arms. I pulled back and stood there, breathing fast. I slammed the window shut to the halfway point and locked it. Then I stepped back and walked away. My hands shook. I tried to calm myself by focusing on small tasks, like taking out the trash and organizing my closet. It didn't help. Every so often I glanced over at the window. I felt like it was watching me, waiting for me to get too close. A few hours passed, and I decided I needed a break. I grabbed my keys and went outside for a walk. I wandered around the block, hoping the fresh air would clear my head. The building had a gloomy facade, with chipped bricks and vines creeping up the side. My apartment was on the side that didn't face the street, so it overlooked a narrow courtyard filled with trash cans. I tried not to think about the shape I thought I saw. It was probably my imagination playing tricks. I convinced myself it was just a shadow. When I came back, the landlord was at the front desk flipping through a stack of mail. He gave me a short nod, then looked away. I considered asking him more about the window, but I felt embarrassed. I didn't want him to think I was scared or that I was blaming him for something. Instead, I just waved and headed upstairs. That night, I sat in the living room to watch some TV. I kept the lights on and told myself I wouldn't freak out. At around 10 p.m., a breeze stirred and I heard a soft rattling at the window. I felt my throat tighten. I turned the volume down and listened carefully. The rattling got louder, like the wind was trying to push the glass inward. I stood up and walked over, one step at a time. My ankles felt stiff. The floor creaked under me. The rattling stopped the second I reached the window. I placed my hand on the sill. The wood felt cold and damp. Outside, I saw the glow of a street lamp in the dirty courtyard. Then, a flicker of movement caught my eye. Something shifted along the wall, maybe 10 feet away from the window. It looked like a figure, but it moved without a sound. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst through my chest. I blinked and the shape was gone. I leaned forward, nearly pressing my nose to the glass. The courtyard was dark and quiet. There was nobody there, but my arms were shaking and sweat formed at the back of my neck. I backed away from the window and paced around the living room. I wanted to call someone, but who would I call? The police? I'd sound crazy describing a shape that vanished in the darkness. I decided to stay awake and keep the lights on. I sat on the couch, arms wrapped around my knees, waiting to see if anything else happened. Around 2 a.m., exhaustion got the better of me, and I dozed off. The next day, I tried to talk to the landlord. I found him unlocking the building's maintenance closet. I asked him, "What's the deal with that window? Is there something wrong with it?" His face went pale. He looked away for a second, then mumbled something about old building, old rules. He said he had known the previous tenants. They all left quickly, but he refused to give details. Before I could press him further, he shuffled away. I went back upstairs, feeling more uneasy than ever. That night, I decided I wouldn't sit around waiting for weird stuff to happen. I taped the window half closed so it wouldn't swing or rattle. Then I turned on a small lamp near the sill. I sat on a chair facing it, determined to keep watch. At around midnight, I heard a scraping sound. It started low, almost like fingernails on wood. I held my breath. My chest felt tight again, and my fingertips tingled. A cold sweat ran down my back. I kept my eyes locked on the glass. The scraping grew louder, like someone was dragging a sharp object along the outer frame. My hands clenched the arms of the chair. I wanted to rush over, yank the window open, and scream at whoever was out there, but I was petrified. The scraping turned into a series of light taps. It sounded like knuckles knocking on the glass from outside. Tap, tap, tap. There was no ledge, no balcony, nothing that could hold a person's weight. Yet something was there, knocking right at eye level. My heart hammered so intensely that I felt a cramp in my chest. I forced myself to stand up. I took a shaky step forward. My throat was dry and my breathing sounded loud in my ears. Tap, tap, tap. I reached out and touched the glass. I felt a slight vibration, as if an actual hand was knocking. I jerked my hand away. The tapping stopped, and everything went silent. My ears buzzed and I couldn't move for several seconds. Suddenly, a gust of wind pushed the window open despite the tape, ripping it free. The latch snapped back, and the window flew inward with a bang. The cold night air rushed in, carrying a musty smell. I stumbled backward and nearly fell over the chair. The lamp flickered. My eyes darted to the open window. No one was there, just the black sky and the faint outline of the courtyard below. I lunged forward and grabbed the frame. My mind screamed at me to close it to that half-locked position again. I couldn't see anything out there, but I felt a presence. It was strong, like a weight pressing on my chest. My arms trembled as I forced the window back into the correct position. The moment it locked into place, the wind died down. I took a few steps back, panting, my legs weak. I hurried to the bedroom and shut the door. I could still feel that tingle in my chest. It pulsed in time with my heartbeat. I crawled under the covers, turned on my bedside lamp, and stared at the door. Every tiny noise in the apartment made me jump. I stayed like that until the first light of morning peeked under the curtains. Then I dragged myself out of bed feeling like a zombie. For the next few days, I tried to make peace with the window. I avoided messing with the latch. I kept the window at that half-open position, just as the landlord said. Each night I heard faint scraping and tapping, but it never escalated the way it did before. I stopped looking outside. I didn't want to see any shapes. I didn't want to confront whatever was there. A part of me was still curious, but I was also terrified. My only goal was to keep the noise at a minimum so I could sleep. One evening, as I walked past the window, I caught a glimpse of something moving outside. It wasn't big, but it moved up the wall. I froze, stepping closer to the glass. My heart pounded. I got near enough to see a dark shape clinging to the brick. I couldn't make out features, but it was definitely some sort of figure. It hung there silently, then slid out of view. I wanted to scream, but my voice wouldn't come out. A burning sensation filled my chest. I backed away slowly and bumped into the couch. I took a deep breath, then another. I told myself not to look out again. Now every time I pass that window, I feel that rush of anxiety, that prickly sensation in my torso. I keep it half open, no matter how cold or hot it gets. I don't bother to lock it. I avoid that corner of the living room at night. If I hear tapping, I try to ignore it. If I sense movement outside, I walk away. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night with a ringing in my ears, convinced I heard banging. But I stay in bed, heart pounding, until I drift off again. I still live here because moving out is complicated. I have a year-long lease and I can't afford to break it. I don't have easy alternatives. The landlord keeps his distance and we haven't talked about the window again. I'm not sure if I can handle another confrontation with whatever clings to that wall. All I know is I won't be closing that window all the way. I learned my lesson. If it wants to stay half open, I'll leave it that way. I'm not going to test it again. And that's my story. If you ever move into an old building and someone warns you about a window, trust them. It might save you a lot of sleepless nights. It started with a single bark that cut through the silence of my bedroom. I was half asleep, but the sound jolted me awake so fast that my heart pounded against my ribs. I sat up, rubbed my eyes, and listened. More barking echoed from outside my window. It sounded close. I felt a rush of unease. I forced myself out of bed, walked to the window, and pulled the curtain aside. That's when I saw a big dog standing in the weak glow of the street lamp across the sidewalk. It stood still, staring up at my second-floor window. I stood there, staring back until I realized something strange. There were no footprints in the dirt and no tracks on the grass. The ground was a little muddy from the rain earlier, yet the space around the dog looked untouched. I blinked a couple of times and tried to figure out if I was really seeing all this. The dog's head was large, and its eyes were locked on me. My breath caught in my throat, and my stomach tightened. I felt a prickle on my skin, and my palms began to sweat. I leaned closer to the window, searching for any movement or any sign that the dog had walked there, but everything looked smooth. The mud in my small yard should have shown paw prints. Instead, I saw nothing. The dog tilted its head as if it sensed my confusion. Then it turned and disappeared behind my neighbor's stone wall. I waited. I didn't see it reappear on the other side. For a few seconds, I stood there, uncertain. My throat felt dry, and I could still feel my heart thumping hard. I went downstairs. My house was dark. The lights were off, and the only glow came from a small lamp in the hallway that I usually leave on. I opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. I expected to see muddy tracks, but the concrete was clean. The yard was damp from the earlier rain, but the grass didn't look disturbed. My shoes pressed into the soft ground, and I left clear footprints. I felt a wave of tension in my neck and shoulders. I told myself that maybe the dog had approached from another angle, but still, it felt off. I walked around to the side of the house, trying not to slip on the wet grass. I peeked behind the neighbor's wall, where the dog had vanished. I saw nothing but an empty walkway that led to another street. The wind picked up. My t-shirt clung to my chest. I stood there for a minute, waiting for any movement. I heard distant barks from a few blocks away, but they sounded normal, like the usual neighborhood dogs. Yet I felt uneasy. Something about that dog staring at me had me on edge. I returned inside, locked the door, and went back to my bedroom. My mind wouldn't settle, so I watched some late-night television for a while. After about an hour, I turned off the TV and tried to sleep. My eyes stayed open for a long time, scanning the room in the dark. Eventually, I dozed off. The next morning, I woke up later than usual. My back ached because I'd slept in a strange position. I went about my routine, brewed some coffee, and stood by the kitchen counter. That's when I noticed a smell in the air. It hit me suddenly, like a damp rag. It smelled like wet dog hair. I frowned and sniffed around. I don't have any pets. My windows were closed. My front door was locked. I walked through my living room, checking for any open window or door. Everything looked secure, but the smell was there in the hallway, near the couch, even in the kitchen. It was faint, but it lingered. I felt my stomach twist. I opened some windows to let in fresh air and tried to ignore the odor. I told myself that maybe it was coming from outside, drifting in. But it persisted. I spent the day at work and tried not to think about it. When I returned that evening, I walked into the house and smelled it again. It clung to the air. My nerves started to fray. That night, around 10 o'clock, I heard barking from outside. The bark seemed to shift from one side of the street to the other. I ran to my window and looked out, but I didn't see anything at first. Then I saw movement near my front gate. It was that same large dog standing there staring. I felt a rush of adrenaline. I stepped back from the window. My breathing grew shallow, and I felt my pulse in my temples. I peered out again. The dog paced back and forth, but once again I didn't see any tracks or signs of movement. I could see the wet grass glisten under the streetlight, but there were no dark patches from paw prints. I decided to confront it. I ran downstairs, opened the front door, and stepped outside. By the time I reached the yard, the dog was gone. I looked around, feeling exposed. My heart was pounding so loud that I could hear my blood throbbing in my ears. I spotted a neighbor across the street taking out the trash. I asked him if he saw the dog. He shook his head. He said he heard some barking, but didn't see anything unusual. I forced a tight smile and went back inside. That night I locked all the windows and doors. I double-checked them. Then I sat in the living room with the lights on. At around midnight I heard the barking again, this time from the back of the house. I jumped off the couch, moved to the window, and peeked through the blinds. I saw the dog's shape slipping behind my backyard fence. My knees felt weak. My chest felt tight. I rushed to the back door, but I stopped myself before opening it. Something felt wrong. I felt goosebumps on my arms. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. The barking seemed to come from different corners of the yard. It sounded close, then distant, then close again. I paced in the kitchen, trying to figure out what to do. My mouth was dry. I drank some water, but I still felt on edge. I waited a few minutes, then I looked out the back window again. Nothing, just the wet grass and the dark fence. I sniffed the air. That same wet dog smell hit me. It was stronger in the kitchen now, like something had brushed against the walls. I went upstairs, opened my bedroom window, and leaned out to see if I could catch a glimpse of anything on the roof or in the alley behind the house. It was quiet. I stood there for a long time, listening to my own breathing. A few cars passed on the main street a couple of blocks away. Eventually, I heard more barking, but it sounded further off. I tried to calm myself. I told myself I was imagining the worst. I managed to sleep, but it was a restless sleep filled with sudden jolts awake. In the days that followed, the barking became more unpredictable. Sometimes I heard it late in the afternoon. Other times I heard it just after dusk. A few times it startled me in the middle of the night. Each time I tensed up. My shoulders grew stiff and I felt a heavy lump in my throat. I looked outside and occasionally spotted the dog, always near my yard or near a neighbor's fence, but never leaving any marks. It always disappeared behind a wall or a fence before I could get close. And the smell inside my house never went away. It seemed to move around, sometimes strong in the living room, other times lingering in the hallway. I scrubbed the floors and furniture, thinking it might be some random source, but nothing helped. One evening, I decided to take a walk through the neighborhood after hearing distant barking. I wanted to see if other people were noticing it. I put on a jacket and walked around. I passed a couple of neighbors who were heading to their cars. They heard the barking too, but they shrugged it off. They said strays sometimes wander through the area. I didn't mention the footprints or the lack of them. I didn't mention the smell in my house. I felt uneasy talking about it, like I might sound paranoid. I circled back to my home and walked around my property with a flashlight. I checked every patch of grass for tracks. The soil was damp and my own shoe prints were clear, but there were no paw prints. The air felt cool on my skin and my ears rang with the quiet. I tried to listen for any whimper or rustle, but I only heard the hum of distant traffic. I went back inside, locked up, and sat on the couch. Later that night, I heard scratching near the back door. It wasn't violent scratching, but it was enough to make me jump. I froze for a few seconds. Then I stood up, approached the door, and listened. The scratch repeated, slow and steady. My heart pounded. My hands shook. I flicked on the porch light. Through the small window on the door, I saw a shadow. It was tall and still. I stepped back, trying to decide if I should open the door. The scratching continued. Then a bark came from the other side, followed by a low growl. It made my skin crawl. I reached for my phone, not sure who I'd even call. Animal control? The police? I hovered by the door with my phone in my hand. Another growl came, then silence. I leaned closer to the window. The shadow was gone. My breath trembled. I switched off the porch light and stepped away from the door. The smell of wet dog hair grew stronger in the hallway. I felt my stomach churn. I sat awake for hours that night. I listened to the house. It creaked and settled. Sometimes I imagined I heard soft panting or nails clicking on the floor. I got up more than once to check every corner. I never found anything. By morning, I felt drained. Over the next week, the barking continued in different parts of the neighborhood. I kept hearing it outside my windows, behind the fence, near the porch. Every time, I felt that same tension under my skin. Sometimes I managed to catch a glimpse of the dog before it slipped away. It always looked the same. Large, dark fur, intense eyes. It never left any tracks. I started sleeping with a bat next to my bed. I felt silly, but I couldn't shake the anxiety. My body was on high alert all the time. My appetite fell off. I paced the house, checking windows, sniffing the air. That wet dog smell never vanished completely. It moved through the rooms without a pattern. I asked a friend to stay over one night just so I wouldn't be alone. He fell asleep on the couch. Around midnight, I heard the barking again and shook him awake. He heard it too, but when we looked outside, we saw nothing. He commented on a strange smell in the living room. I told him I had no idea what it was. He didn't press the issue. Eventually, he went home, and I returned to my anxious routine of scanning the yard whenever the barking started. Every time I saw that dog, I felt a cold sweat on my skin. My thoughts raced, but I had no explanation. No one in the neighborhood seemed too concerned, though a couple of neighbors mentioned hearing some weird barking at odd hours. None of them mentioned a smell. None of them seemed spooked by a dog's stare. Yesterday, I heard barking again in the early evening. I rushed to the window. The dog was across the street near a row of trash bins, staring right at me. I pressed my forehead against the glass, trying to see if it left any footprints in the dirt around the bins. The area looked smooth. My heart hammered in my chest. I opened the window and shouted, "Hey!" The dog didn't move. It just stood there with its ears pricked. Then it turned and walked behind a fence. No tracks again. Now I'm here, sitting at my kitchen table, telling this story. I feel a knot in my stomach. That wet dog smell is in the air again. I keep the windows closed, but it still seeps in. I just heard barking a few minutes ago, this time near my front gate. I'm not sure how to handle it anymore. I've thought about calling animal control, but I'm afraid they'll think I'm making things up, especially when I mention the lack of footprints. I'm worried that if they come out here, they won't find anything. Then I'll be stuck with this tension and no answers. I don't know where this dog came from, and I don't know why it keeps appearing around my house. All I know is that I hear its bark at unexpected times. I see it behind my windows or through the blinds, and I smell its wet fur in my living space. Every night I brace myself for more scratching at the door. Every morning I wake up with sore muscles because I've been sleeping on edge. I can't figure out what's happening or why, and I can't see an end to this. It's an ongoing presence, like a constant weight on my mind. I hear a bark right now. It's coming from the side of the house. My hands are shaking again. I'm going to look outside. I just need to know if it's there, staring at me again. I'm not sure if it ever left. I first heard about the building a few weeks ago when my boss asked me to check it out for possible art exhibitions. I wasn't too interested at first because I had other projects on my plate. But then I saw a couple of photos of the place, and something about the structure grabbed my attention. It looked quiet and old, like nobody had set foot in it for years. The email said it used to be a gallery back in the day, and there might still be some artwork inside. I agreed to visit and see if it would work for a modern art show. I didn't expect anything strange. I just wanted to do my job and go home. But I found something there I can't explain. When I arrived at the building for the first time, I noticed that the paint on the outside walls was cracking. The windows looked dusty. The main door creaked when I pushed it open. The interior hallway smelled of old wood and mold. There was a faint light from a few small windows. It was enough for me to see where I was going, but everything looked gray. The floorboards under my feet let out a slow groan whenever I took a step. I walked through a couple of rooms with bare walls. They were empty, except for some broken chairs in the corners and a few scattered papers on the floor. I bent down to check if there was anything written on those papers. Most were blank or had faint pencil marks that were impossible to read. The place felt hollow, like it wanted to keep its secrets hidden. Eventually, I got to a long corridor that led me to a closed door. I twisted the knob, which was stiff, but not locked. Inside, there was a small gallery space. I saw frames leaning against walls. They were covered by dusty cloth. I pulled one of the cloth covers aside. Underneath, there was a painting of a landscape, faded and scratched. It had tall mountains and some trees, but it looked like it had been neglected for decades. I didn't see any artist's signature. I continued checking each painting. Most were plain or damaged beyond recognition. Then I noticed a large frame in the corner, hidden under a dark sheet. My heartbeat picked up a little. I don't know why. I guess I felt a rush of curiosity. I pulled the sheet off. Underneath was a portrait of a man. He had broad shoulders, a tall posture, and a hat tilted down. But he had no face. There was just a blank space where his features should be. It wasn't smudged or scratched away. It looked like the artist painted a head, and then left the face empty on purpose. I stared at it. The colors around the man's silhouette looked strange. The brushstrokes seemed neat, but the head was smooth and blank. It felt unsettling. My stomach tightened a bit. I wanted to see who the artist was, but there was nothing on the frame. No name, no date. I looked around for any signature, but I found nothing. I opened a small drawer in a broken cabinet nearby, thinking maybe there were records of the artwork. Nothing there except dust and a few dead insects. I took some notes on my phone, mostly about the dimensions and condition of the painting. When I got home, I couldn't stop thinking about that piece. A man with a blank face doesn't sound that weird in an abstract painting, but this wasn't abstract. The rest of him was detailed, and the clothing seemed very realistic. It was just the face that was missing. That night, I tried to sleep. I laid in bed, closed my eyes, and told myself I was just overthinking it. But then I dreamed of that same figure. He stood in a dark space, facing me, with his blank face pointed in my direction. I couldn't see any eyes, but I sensed he was staring at me. I woke up sweaty, my heart beating hard. I glanced at my phone. It was around 3:09 a.m. I got out of bed, drank some water, and tried to breathe slowly. Eventually, I lay back down and fell asleep again. The next day, I decided to look for information about the old gallery. I contacted a local historical society and asked them if they had any records of past exhibitions or resident artists. They sent me a few scanned documents. None mentioned a faceless portrait. They listed artists who showed landscapes, sculptures, and portraits of local figures, but nothing like I had seen. I searched online too. I typed in every keyword I could think of: faceless man painting, unknown portrait, old local art galleries. I found no direct match. I gave up and decided to head back to the building to finish my evaluation. On my second visit, I arrived around mid-afternoon. The light outside was a little dim because clouds covered the sky. I walked straight to that small gallery room, stepping carefully over loose floorboards. I pulled the door open, and I immediately went to where the portrait stood. This time I had my flashlight ready because the room was darker than before. When I aimed the light on the painting, I noticed a slight difference. The outline of the man's ears seemed more defined. I didn't remember them being so clear on my last visit. His neck also looked like it had more shading. It felt weird, like the painter had come back to add more details. I stood there for a minute, trying to figure out if I was imagining things. My notes from the first day mentioned a blank face, but I didn't write anything about ears or extra shading. I felt my heartbeat rise again. I touched the surface of the painting with my fingertips. The paint felt dry and cold. Nothing unusual, but the difference was there. I checked the rest of the frames in the room, but they were exactly the same as before. I had a creeping sensation that I was being watched, even though I was alone. I heard the old wood creaking under my feet and the distant sound of dripping water. I wanted to leave as soon as possible. I took pictures of the painting with my phone, hoping to compare them to the ones I took on my first visit. Then I left the building and went home. That night, I dreamed of him again. The faceless man stood in the same dark space. This time I noticed a slight bump where his nose should be, like it was pushing out of the blank canvas of his face. He turned his head to the side, and I felt my hands shaking in the dream. My chest felt tight, and I woke up gasping for air. I found myself sitting up in bed, drenched in sweat. My heart was pounding. I grabbed my phone and checked the photos I took. I zoomed in, and yes, the painting I photographed had the beginnings of ears. They weren't fully shaped, but they were outlined. I felt sick to my stomach. I decided to skip any deeper research that night and tried to distract myself by watching a random TV show until I calmed down. On my third visit, I arrived earlier in the day. I thought maybe seeing the place in bright daylight would make me feel better. But inside, it was still dim. The windows were small and dust floated in the air. I walked quickly to the gallery and shone my flashlight on the portrait. Now the man's cheekbones were slightly visible. The shape of his jaw looked stronger. I felt a wave of dread. I moved closer and noticed a faint suggestion of eyes. Not full eyes, but shadows where they would be. My legs felt weak, and I had to take a step back. My breathing got heavier. My throat felt dry. I pulled my phone out and snapped more pictures. My hand shook, so I took a few extra shots. Then I left. I didn't check the other paintings or the rest of the building. I just rushed outside, jumped in my car, and sat there for a few minutes before starting the engine. My hands were sweaty on the steering wheel. I felt like I needed air. I cracked the car window open and took deep breaths. My mind was racing. I couldn't explain how a painting could change on its own. That night, I had the same dream. Now the man had partial eyes, like half-formed orbs. He stood there looking at me, though I couldn't see pupils or iris. My heart pounded, and I felt fear spread through my chest. I woke up with a headache. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. I noticed my eyes were bloodshot. I also saw that my face looked tired. For a moment, I thought I resembled the shape in the painting. I shook my head, splashed cold water on my face, and tried not to think about it. I called my boss and explained what was going on. I told him the building might not be suitable for an exhibition because of the state it was in. I mentioned structural issues, water damage, and poor lighting. I didn't mention the painting. My boss told me to finalize my report soon. I hung up and decided I had to go back one last time. I needed to see if the painting changed again. On my fourth visit, I arrived late morning. The hallway smelled even mustier than before. I walked with tense steps toward the gallery. My stomach churned and my palms felt clammy. When I entered, I pointed my flashlight at the painting. The man's face now had almost complete features. I recognized my own eyes and the shape of my nose. The hairline also resembled mine. I felt a cold knot in my chest, like something inside me froze. I wanted to destroy the painting or run away, but I just stood there. My breathing became shallow. I lifted my phone to take photos again. My hand trembled so much that I had to brace my arm against the wall. I snapped a few pictures, then started backing out of the room. As I did, I heard a faint scraping sound. I stopped. My heart pounded in my ears. I glanced around. Nothing moved, but the noise felt close, like something shifted on the floor or behind a wall. I quickly left the gallery and tried not to run down the corridor. I stepped outside into the daylight and breathed in fresh air. I felt dizzy. I climbed into my car and just sat there, gripping the steering wheel. My mind kept returning to that image. It looked like me, but with blank eyes. That night, I refused to sleep at my own apartment. I packed a bag and checked into a small hotel a few miles away. I wanted to break the pattern of those dreams. I stayed awake until after midnight, watching random videos. My eyes burned. Finally, I dozed off. The dream came again. The man looked exactly like me now, except his eyes were white. He stared at me with no expression because there was no color in his eyes. I woke up in the hotel room, feeling my heart racing. My throat felt tight, and I noticed I was gripping the sheets with both hands. The next morning, I decided I was done. I wrote a short report for my boss. I claimed the building wasn't worth the effort. I told him there was too much damage and that the gallery space was too small. I didn't mention the painting at all. Then I packed my things, got in my car, and drove out of town. I needed distance. I headed for a friend's place in another city, about 2 hours away. I spent the rest of the day trying not to think about the painting. I kept telling myself it was all in my head, that I was just imagining those changes. But whenever I closed my eyes, I saw the portrait. I saw my own face reflected back at me with those strange, blank eyes. It's been a few days now. I haven't gone back. I'm not sure if I ever will. Sometimes I feel like I can sense that painting somewhere out there, alone in that dark gallery, waiting. My nights are still broken by flashes of that faceless man. I'm hoping that with time, these dreams will stop. But I can't erase that image from my mind. I don't know what it was, and I don't know why it seemed to follow me. All I know is I'll never forget that feeling of dread when I looked at the painting and saw my own features growing out of that blank face. I don't have any answers, and I'm not sure I want them. I just know it happened, and I can still feel it when I close my eyes. I noticed something strange the moment I stepped into my living room that morning. The plastic sheets covered every piece of furniture, and the walls looked half-stripped from the recent renovation work. Yet there was a chill in the air that I hadn't felt before. The worker I hired had called me over, pointing to a weird circular opening in the wall. It wasn't there the day before, and it definitely wasn't in any blueprint I'd ever seen. There was no explanation for it. It was about 3 inches across, and something about its edges made me uneasy. They looked chipped, but not in a natural way. It felt like the wall had grown a mouth overnight. I stood there, trying not to show my discomfort to the worker. He was an older guy with rough hands and steady eyes. He just said, "I've never seen anything like that. We'll patch it up tomorrow." He sounded sure of himself. I nodded because I didn't know what else to say. Deep down, I couldn't shake a weird sense of tension. I walked over to the hole and placed my palm against the wall around it. It felt colder than the rest of the room. I told myself it was just the wind sneaking in from somewhere. Then the worker covered it with a piece of tape and promised he'd handle it soon. After he left for the day, I tried to go about my business. As night came, I settled on the couch. My place was dark and cluttered from the renovation. I had to navigate around paint cans and a ladder just to get to the kitchen. The living room lights were dim because I'd removed 2 bulbs earlier. There was a flicker from the street lamp outside, so shadows kept shifting across the walls. I tried to watch some late-night TV, but the moment I turned it off, I heard a muffled sound. It was soft at first, like a breeze passing through a narrow space. I listened for a second, convinced it was nothing. Then I heard it again, louder, like someone calling my name. At first, I just froze. My heart pounded. I stared at that patched-up spot on the wall. The tape was still there, but it looked slightly loose around the edges, like something was pushing from inside. I got up, walked closer, and pressed my ear against it. I waited. I heard heavy breathing, or at least that's what it sounded like to me. I wanted to dismiss it, but my name came again. It wasn't clear, but I recognized the shape of the syllables. It was like a hushed plea. My scalp tightened. I yanked my head back and stood in the middle of the living room for a few seconds, unsure what to do. I thought I might be hallucinating, maybe from stress. There's a lot that happens when you're renovating. You lose your routine, the place looks like a mess, and your brain tries to cope. So, I decided to check if there was some trick of the wind. I peeled back the tape. The hole looked a bit larger than before. I couldn't be sure, but it seemed more like 4 inches across. I put my ear close again. I felt a blast of cold air. It hit my face and neck, making me shudder. I took a few steps back. That cold felt unnatural, like it didn't belong here in my living room. Then the voice came again. This time it was clear enough that I couldn't dismiss it. It said my name, followed by, "Help me." My hands started shaking. I realized I was still holding the loose tape and I dropped it on the floor. I whispered, "Who's there?" I wasn't expecting an answer. My voice trembled, and I felt a thumping in my chest that wouldn't quit. The room felt too quiet. My question hung in the air. Then the voice said, "I need you to come closer." Its tone was soft but urgent. I looked around, half expecting to see someone behind me, but there was no one else in the apartment. The voice sounded so near, though. It was right behind that wall. I tried to calm down. I took a step closer and very slowly leaned in. I stuck my finger inside the hole, just to see if there was some draft or hidden pipe. My fingertip met something cold and damp. It felt like a breeze was pulling at my skin from the other side. I pulled my hand back and wiped it on my jeans. I stood there with adrenaline buzzing through me. My breath was coming in short gasps. "How did you get in there?" I asked. It seemed like a stupid question, but I had no clue what else to say. The voice responded, "I've been stuck here. Please." I looked around my apartment, trying to figure out if I should call someone. But who would I call? The cops? A contractor? It all seemed too weird to explain. I pictured myself on the phone saying, "There's someone behind my wall." They'd think I was crazy. I decided to see if the voice would explain more. I leaned in and said, "What do you need me to do?" The reply was faint. "Keep talking to me, don't leave me." I felt this pull inside me, a mixture of compassion and fear. There was a desperation in that voice. It sounded human, but I couldn't grasp how a person could be stuck inside a solid wall. I thought about a hidden crawl space or an old shaft, but the building wasn't that old. Also, that section of the wall was supposed to be solid concrete. I spent about an hour just speaking to whoever was behind there. I asked questions about how they got there, and all I got were pleas to help them out. No answers. The voice kept repeating my name and thanking me every time I said I wouldn't leave. My shoulders felt tense, and my eyes kept darting around the room, expecting something else to happen. The hole seemed to widen a bit during that time, maybe by another inch or so. The edges continued to chip away on their own, flaking off in small bits. I didn't see any tool or force doing that. It just happened. Sometimes I heard a slow scraping sound, like nails on concrete. It was late, and I felt exhausted. My entire day had been stressful, and now my night was turning into a nightmare. I told the voice I had to rest, but it whimpered, begging me not to go. I told it that I would come back in the morning. My whole body tingled with unease. I ended up leaving a dim lamp on in the living room so I could see if anything changed overnight. Then I went to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. That lock never felt necessary before, but tonight I needed some sense of protection. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured the hole growing larger, swallowing the wall, letting something out into my apartment. I woke up at least 4 times, each time certain I heard footsteps in the hallway. When morning came, I had a headache and felt shaky. I walked out to the living room to check. The hole was definitely bigger now, maybe 6 inches wide, and I could see deeper inside. The interior wasn't just drywall or insulation. It looked darker, like a tunnel. I grabbed a flashlight from a kitchen drawer and shone it in. The beam only went so far, but I saw some kind of passage stretching back. I couldn't tell if it was made of concrete or stone. The voice was quiet now. I called out. Nothing answered. I went about my day, but I felt distracted. I was supposed to have the worker come back, but he texted me that he had a family emergency and wouldn't arrive until the next day. I paced around the apartment, checking the hole every few minutes. By late afternoon, I started hearing small tapping sounds from inside. They were light taps, spaced out like someone was testing the wall. I crouched down and pressed my ear close. That cold air touched my skin again, and I tensed up. Then the voice returned, softer this time. "I'm still here." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. "Who are you?" I asked again. The voice paused. "I don't know." It answered quietly. I felt a chill run through me. I stared into that dark space for a few seconds, my pulse drumming in my temples. The voice said, "I only know I need your help." That was it. No more details. I grew frustrated. "I can't pull you out if I don't know where you are," I said, stepping closer. The hole's edges looked jagged, and I could see bits of plaster on the floor around my feet. The voice only replied, "Please don't leave." Its tone sounded weaker, like it was losing energy. I decided I had to see if I could reach further in. I rolled up my sleeve and carefully pushed my arm inside up to my elbow. The space inside felt cold and damp. The texture on the sides was gritty, almost like coarse stone. My fingertips brushed empty air. I couldn't feel another side. I kept pushing, ignoring the discomfort. Suddenly, I felt something brush against my hand. It was a light touch, almost like another hand trying to grab mine. I jerked my arm back out, breathing hard. My skin had goosebumps. I stared at the hole, half expecting to see a hand come out, but nothing did. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I almost jumped out of my skin. It was a call from a friend checking in. I didn't know how to explain what was happening, so I just mumbled something about being busy. When I looked back at the wall, I noticed the hole was now maybe 8 inches across. My living room floor was scattered with more bits of debris. The expansion was slow but steady. I realized if this continued, the worker's temporary fix wouldn't matter. I needed to do something. Evening approached again, and the shadows crept around my apartment. The voice grew more desperate. It kept calling my name, sometimes repeating the words "help" or "I'm cold." I felt bad for it, and I also felt terrified. I tried knocking on the neighboring walls to see if there was some hidden corridor or space. Everything sounded solid. I could almost feel the building structure behind the drywall. Nothing suggested a secret room. The entire situation made no sense. I grabbed a crowbar from my toolkit and thought about widening the hole myself. Maybe if I removed the plaster, I could see more clearly. Part of me worried about letting something dangerous into my home. But the voice sounded so pitiful, I couldn't stand it anymore. I knocked a few times on the surrounding wall. The voice said, "I can feel you." That made my skin crawl. I started prying at the edges. Pieces of plaster fell to the floor, revealing more of that dark interior. I shone my flashlight inside again, and I could see a narrow space extending a few feet back, then curving out of sight. A breeze hit me full in the face. It was bitterly cold, much colder than it had been before. I felt tears form in the corners of my eyes because of the sudden temperature drop. My teeth chattered. I asked, Can you come closer to the opening? The voice didn't respond. I tried again, but all I heard was a long exhale, like a sigh. It sounded close, maybe a foot away from the hole's entrance. I leaned in, shining the flashlight around, and saw what looked like the shape of a shoulder. I froze. I only got a glimpse before it backed away into the shadows. It was pale, but I couldn't see much detail. I sank back onto the floor, trying to steady my breathing. My legs felt weak. The presence behind the wall was definitely not a figment of my imagination. It was something physical, or at least partly physical. I sat there for a while, not sure how to move forward. The voice said, "Don't leave me alone." My heart pounded. I realized I was covered in sweat despite the cold. I told it, "I'm here. I just don't know how to help you yet." The next hour was tense. I tried knocking down more wall. I made the hole wide enough for my entire arm and shoulder to fit through. The dust choked me. I coughed hard, and my eyes stung. The space inside looked like a narrow passage that snaked to the right. I couldn't see much else. The voice kept urging me, "Come in." But there was no way I could fit my entire body through that opening yet. I needed more tools, maybe a sledgehammer. I also worried about structural damage. If I knocked out too much, the whole wall might come down. I considered calling the worker, but it was past 9 at night and he had already said he'd come tomorrow. I stared at the opening I'd created. It was almost big enough to crawl through. The voice was so close I felt its breath on my face now. A strange mix of cold and something like musty air. My stomach churned. The dryness in my mouth made it hard to speak. I told the voice, "I'll get a better tool. Hang on." But as I rose to get my bigger sledgehammer from the hall closet, the voice pleaded again, "Hurry, it's closing." I looked back at the hole. The edges seemed to be trembling, like the structure was shifting. I placed my hand on the side of the wall. It felt warm for a second, then cold again. My mind spun with questions. I ran to the closet, grabbed the hammer, and came back. The hole didn't look like it was getting smaller, but I felt an urgency building in my chest. I swung the hammer at the sides, widening the opening piece by piece. The dust and small chunks of concrete flew everywhere. My arms ached. After a few hits, the gap was big enough for me to squeeze through if I crouched. When I placed my head into the newly expanded space, the air turned freezing. My breath formed small clouds. I forced myself inside up to my waist, shining the flashlight. The passage curved immediately to the right. It was just wide enough for me to crawl. The walls looked rough, like they'd been carved out. My pulse raced in my ears. That voice kept calling, "This way." I felt drawn forward, but at the same time my instincts screamed at me to back out. My flashlight flickered. The cold was almost unbearable. My teeth rattled and my fingers felt numb. I dragged myself a few more inches, pressing my back against one side of the passage. Then I heard a scraping sound, louder than before. It echoed all around me. A heavy dread filled my stomach. My mind raced with images of the wall collapsing behind me. I tested the space. If anything happened, could I turn around and retreat? That's when I felt the lightest touch on my shoulder. I jerked around, nearly dropping the flashlight. There was no one there, or at least no one I could see in the dim beam. But I felt the presence. The voice was only a few inches away. It said, "Thank you." So close it felt like it spoke right into my ear. My skin prickled. I called out in a trembling voice, "I can't see you. Where are you?" The voice responded, "Here." And I felt another slight brush against my arm, as if guiding me forward. I was at my limit. My breath was ragged and I was covered in a cold sweat. I realized I didn't have a plan for getting back if something went wrong. My body was shaking, and the confined space made it hard to breathe normally. I said, "I'll come back with someone else. I need help." The voice sounded panicked. "Please don't leave me alone here." I looked down the dark passage, my flashlight catching glimpses of rough surfaces. My heart throbbed so hard it felt like it might crack a rib. I started backing out, my shoes scraping against the concrete. The voice kept pleading, "No, Don't go. But I forced myself to retreat. My mind was on the edge of panic. Once I was out in my living room again, I gasped for air, feeling sweat trickle down my face. The hole in the wall sat there, larger than ever, revealing that strange tunnel. I collapsed onto the floor, leaning against the couch, hammer still in my hand. My body shook. The voice continued to call for me, but I stayed put. I couldn't force myself to go back in alone. I couldn't think of any logical explanation for that space or that voice. All I knew was that my apartment wall was no ordinary structure. Something existed behind it, and it wanted me to come deeper. It needed help, or claimed it did. I decided then to wait for the workers' arrival the next day. I sat there in the half-lit room trying to control my breathing. My eyes never left that gaping hole. Occasionally I saw shadows or felt a gust of cold air emerge. The voice spoke less and less as the night wore on, but it didn't stop entirely. It stayed there, quietly calling my name, like it had no one else to turn to. I couldn't sleep. I just gripped the hammer, stared at that opening, and waited for morning. I still remember how the air felt against my skin that afternoon. It was heavier than usual, like the atmosphere was charged with static. I was driving along an old highway on my way to a work meeting I didn't really care about. The company had sent me out to speak with a client in a small town miles from the main city. The road was empty most of the way, with broken asphalt patches and faded yellow lines. I had my windows cracked just enough to let in a cool breeze. I wasn't expecting anything strange when I left that morning. It was supposed to be a routine trip, but that changed in a single moment. I first noticed something odd when the wind picked up near a bend in the road. Dry leaves scraped across the surface, making a rustling noise that crept into my ears. Then I saw dust swirling in the distance, forming a circular pattern. It spun in one spot, not moving forward or backward. It looked like the wind was trapped there, stuck in a loop. My chest tightened when I realized it wasn't just blowing randomly. It had this shape, almost like a barrier or a fence made of air, dust, and leaves. I slowed down without thinking. I gripped the steering wheel with both hands, holding my breath for a second. The swirl didn't move aside like normal wind gusts. It stayed right in the middle of my lane. I glanced at the clock on my dashboard and saw that I was running late. I felt this urge to keep going, but something in my gut told me to stop. Still, I couldn't be late for that meeting. I eased my foot on the gas and approached the swirling mass, hoping it would dissipate on its own. As soon as my front bumper broke through the dust, I felt the car shake. It wasn't a huge jolt, more like a sudden vibration that came from deep within the engine or the frame. At the same moment, the radio snapped to static. I had a music station on, just some random pop tune, but the sound vanished. A crackle filled the car like multiple voices talking over each other. It was a mess of distorted whispers and high-pitched hums. I couldn't make out any words, but there was a rhythm to it, almost like a group of people whispering in unison. It made my skin crawl. My throat went dry and I felt sweat building on my forehead. The car trembled again, a subtle shake that traveled from the steering wheel into my arms. My heart started to pound. My foot pressed harder on the brake. The swirl of dust and leaves spat debris against my windshield, tapping it with light, repetitive hits. Then the swirling barrier was behind me and the calm air returned. But the radio kept playing that strange static. I couldn't handle the noise, so I turned off the radio completely. I took a few deep breaths and glanced at the rearview mirror. The dust swirl was still there, spinning and spinning just behind me on the road. My mind raced through possibilities, a freak weather pattern, or maybe some strange wind current. Yet that didn't explain the voices in the static. That sound had triggered a jolt of fear deep in my chest. It felt personal somehow, like it had singled me out. I decided to pull over at the next wide shoulder. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I turned on my hazards and brought the car to a stop on a patch of gravel. I sat there for a moment, inhaling and exhaling, trying to calm down. Something kept tickling the back of my neck. like I could still sense those whispered voices even with the radio off. I opened the driver's door and stepped out. My legs felt weak, and my chest was tight. The sun was halfway behind a group of trees, casting long shadows across the asphalt. I looked back at the swirling wind. It hadn't moved. It stayed in the same place, twisting up leaves and dirt, forming a mini tornado in the middle of the road. I heard a faint voice echo in my head, like static bouncing inside my skull. It made my ears ring. I popped open the hood to check if the shaking had caused any damage to the engine. Everything looked normal, but I wasn't exactly calm. My heartbeat pounded so loud I thought my head might burst. A breeze rolled in, rustling the trees and blowing dust across my shoes. I slammed the hood shut and wiped the sweat off my forehead with the back of my hand. Then I sensed movement out of the corner of my eye. I turned slowly. Standing in the middle of that swirl was a figure, tall, thin, barely distinguishable through the dust. My scalp tingled and my stomach dropped. The figure looked like a person wearing dark clothing, but its features were hard to make out. The leaves and dust spun around it, and the figure just stood there facing me. I couldn't see a face, but I felt its stare. Every hair on my body stood on end. I glanced at the trees lining the road on both sides. No cars were coming from either direction. I was alone with that figure. My mouth went dry as I tried to swallow. My hands trembled and my feet felt glued to the ground. The swirling wind grew louder, making a whooshing sound around the figure. Then, as quickly as it appeared, the figure turned and moved toward the trees. I didn't see it walk. It just seemed to vanish into the shadows. The swirl of dust kept spinning for a moment, then stopped so suddenly that leaves fell straight to the ground. I coughed from the dust in the air and walked forward a few steps, straining to see if the figure was still there. I heard the crackle of branches in the distance, but I couldn't see anyone among the trees. My heart hammered, and I clenched my fists, unsure if I should jump in the car and drive away or investigate. Part of me wanted to leave right then. Another part felt drawn toward the place where the figure disappeared. I forced myself to walk around the passenger side of my car, circling it to see if everything was intact. The tires were fine, no damage to the paint. The swirl hadn't left any visible dents, but I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was watching me from the trees. I felt a pressure on my chest, like a growing panic that made my breathing shaky. The sun slipped lower behind the tree line, and I realized that if I stayed much longer, I'd end up on this road after dark. That thought churned my stomach. I'd never considered myself superstitious, but the voices on the radio and that figure in the dust had messed with my head. It didn't feel safe out here. My body was on high alert, muscles tense, ears straining to catch any sound. I got back into my car and shut the door, locking it immediately. I turned the key in the ignition, half expecting the engine not to start, but it did, humming like normal. A wave of relief washed over me for a second. Then the radio clicked on by itself. The volume was low, but I could hear the static again, those distorted whispers. My hands started to shake on the steering wheel. I switched the radio off and tapped the console, but the static continued to leak out. It felt like it was coming from behind the dashboard or from inside the speakers. I heard a brief hiss, then a voice that sounded garbled but almost human. Words formed for a second, then broke into pure static again. Sweat trickled down my temple. My reflection in the rearview mirror showed wide eyes and shallow breathing. I reached for my phone, but it had no signal. That wasn't a huge surprise on this old road, but it still rattled me. I shoved the phone back into my pocket and gritted my teeth. I tried again to turn off the radio, pressing the power button several times. The static died down eventually, replaced by a faint silence, though I had no idea if it was truly gone or just lurking. I put the car in drive and pulled back onto the road. I forced my eyes to stay forward, avoiding the rearview mirror. My heart was racing and my foot felt heavy on the pedal. I glanced at the shoulder where I had stopped. Nothing was there now, just empty space and a few scattered leaves. The swirl was gone and the road looked peaceful again. I drove for a few miles, feeling my pulse pound at my temples. I switched on the air conditioning to help with the stale smell inside the car. My throat was sore and my skin was clammy. I didn't feel calm in the slightest, but I tried to keep my hands steady on the wheel. Every so often, I heard a faint crackle from the speakers, and my muscles tensed, but the static didn't return in full force. I passed a green sign that indicated another 10 miles to the next town. I decided I'd pull into the first gas station or rest area I saw. I needed a moment to gather myself, maybe wash my face with cold water and try to figure out if I'd imagined any of that. But I knew what I saw. That figure had been there, glaring at me through the dust. I felt it in my chest. Eventually, I saw an old gas station on the right side of the road. The lights on its sign flickered and the place looked half abandoned, but I had no real choice. I pulled in and parked beside a rusted pump. A single overhead lamp illuminated the cracked concrete. I turned off the ignition and listened for a second, waiting to see if the static returned. It didn't, so I exhaled slowly. I stepped out and smelled gasoline and old oil. The place had one store attached, a dirty window covered in flyers, and a door with a broken handle. Inside, I found a tiny counter and a bored-looking clerk. I didn't bother to say much beyond a curt nod. I grabbed a bottle of water from a fridge and paid for it. The clerk asked if I was heading south. I said yes, then asked if he'd seen anything strange on the highway. He just shrugged, looking at me like I was from another planet. "Not really," he said. "Sometimes the wind picks up dust. Locals say it's haunted, but I've never noticed anything." Then he went back to flipping through a magazine. I didn't push it. I just opened the bottle and chugged half of it, letting the cool water calm my throat. Back outside, I leaned against my car for a moment. The sky was a deep orange now, and I could feel the temperature dropping. My mind replayed the moment I saw that figure in the swirl. I noticed my knees were weak, like I'd been running a marathon. I pressed my palm against my forehead, feeling the heat from my own skin. I didn't want to linger any longer, so I decided to get back on the road and reach the town before nightfall. The next stretch of highway felt tense, but nothing happened. The radio stayed silent, and the wind was calm. The asphalt was smooth in places and cracked in others, making my tires thump occasionally. Each thump made me jump a little. My nerves were shot. I glanced in my mirrors more often than usual, checking if anything was behind me. The only thing I saw was an empty road. After a few more miles, I finally saw the lights of the small town. It was a relief to drive under street lamps and see a few houses. I pulled into the motel parking lot and shut off the engine. My shoulders ached from the tension of gripping the steering wheel so tightly. I grabbed my suitcase from the back seat, slammed the door, and locked the car. My eyes flicked around the lot, half expecting another swirl of dust or a figure lurking in the shadows. Inside my room, I flicked on the light and dumped my suitcase on the bed. The walls were thin and I could hear a TV from the next room. I realized I was shaking slightly. My hands had trouble steadying themselves. I leaned against the small desk near the window, took a few deep breaths, and tried to tell myself it was over. But I couldn't forget that figure. I couldn't ignore the static voices that seemed to come from nowhere. The memory of that swirl of dust stuck in my mind. I didn't feel relief, not really. I felt like something had followed me, even if I couldn't see it. My skin prickled whenever I thought about its stare. I kept checking the window, expecting to see it out there in the darkness. The night dragged on, and sleep didn't come easily. My mind repeated the scene on the road. The swirl, the trembling car, the radio static. Every detail was etched into my memory, reminding me that something out there wanted my attention. I was safe inside those 4 motel walls, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that my day on that old highway wasn't just a weird coincidence. It felt like a door had been opened, and I had no idea how to close it again. I never expected to hear a phone ring in that old booth. Most people in town said it was disconnected years ago. No dial tone, no service, nothing. But one night, as I walked past it on a cold evening, it rang, clear as day. That sound cut through the quiet street and made my chest tighten. It didn't make sense. That was the moment I stopped believing everything was normal around here. My name is Daniel. I moved to this small town about 6 months ago to help my uncle run his auto shop. He's older now and doesn't like to deal with cars much anymore. I handle the customers, do some light repairs, and try to keep things organized. It's not exciting, but I like the slow pace. There's only one main road, a single bar, and a few rundown buildings. People go to bed early, and there's not much to do except watch TV or walk around at night when I can't sleep. That phone booth sits on the corner near an old convenience store that closed a long time ago. The store has plywood over its windows, and someone spray-painted some words on the door, but they're faded now. The booth itself is rusted around the edges, and the glass panels are cracked. Inside, the phone hangs on a metal cord with bits of chipped paint around it. I tried picking up the receiver once during the day, months ago, just out of curiosity. There was no dial tone. It was dead, or at least I thought so. One night last week, I was coming back from the bar. I had 2 beers. The air felt sharp against my face. I usually cut through the side street to get home, but something made me go by that corner. As soon as I got close, I heard a phone ring. The sound was loud and jolted me. I stopped, stared at the booth, and saw the phone inside. It was definitely ringing. I checked around to see if anyone else was there, but the sidewalk was empty. I glanced at the store, but it was dark. I stepped closer to the booth. My heart pounded. I wasn't afraid of a phone, but it felt wrong. I pushed open the door, which creaked on its hinges, and picked up the receiver. The ringing stopped the instant I lifted it to my ear. There was silence. I heard my own breathing and nothing else. I said hello once, then again. No one answered. I didn't even hear static. It was total silence, like a muted space. I felt goosebumps spreading across my arms. I put the phone back and left. The next day, I tried not to think about it. I told my uncle about the phone, but he shrugged and said maybe some wiring got crossed, or maybe I was imagining things after drinking. He didn't seem interested. I told a couple of neighbors, but they gave me odd looks. One of them mentioned hearing stories about that booth, but he clammed up before explaining. I started feeling a bit uneasy about the whole thing, but I wasn't willing to let it go, so I decided to pass by again that night just to see if it would ring a second time. Around 9, I left my place. The air was cold enough to sting my nose. The streetlights flickered in that unreliable way they do out here. When I got to the corner, I waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Nothing happened. I felt stupid just standing there, so I decided to head home. I'd taken only a few steps when I heard it. That phone rang again, slicing through the silence like a jagged alarm. I turned around, pushed the booth door open, and picked up the receiver. This time, I heard breathing on the other end. It was a slow, heavy sound, like someone was trying not to speak. My heart thumped so hard I felt it in my throat. I said, "Who's there?" I waited. No answer. Just more breathing. My palms got sweaty and my legs felt stiff. I said, "Hello? Can you hear me?" The breathing shifted, got a bit faster, then it cut off. The line went dead. I stood there for a few more seconds. I felt unsettled, almost shaky. I hung up and walked away, scanning the street for any sign of someone watching me. I didn't see anybody. The sidewalk was empty. The closed store looked lifeless. Over the next couple of days, I asked around about that booth. A few people brushed me off. Others got nervous. One older guy who drinks at the bar said there were rumors about strange calls there. He wouldn't say much more. I tried to find actual records or something at the tiny library in town, but I didn't see anything in the local newspapers. There were no official stories or old articles about anything special happening at that corner. Still, the rumors lingered. People whispered that sometimes the phone would ring when no line was connected. They said folks who answered it never got a clear voice, just weird sounds or silence. A few claimed to have heard a whisper, but nobody had proof. I don't believe in the supernatural. I'm a practical guy, but it bothered me that I couldn't explain it. So I decided to keep checking. Every night for the rest of that week, I went out there around the same time. A couple of nights, there was nothing. No call. just a dead booth that looked abandoned and sad. Then on the fourth night, just as I was about to give up, the ring came again. I jumped at the sound. I went inside, grabbed the receiver quickly. "Hello?" I asked. The line crackled a bit. I heard that breathing again, faint and irregular. I tried staying calm. My heart was racing. "What do you want?" I asked. I felt silly, but I needed some kind of answer. The breathing got heavier. Then I heard what sounded like a single word, but it was too faint to understand. My forehead was damp with sweat despite the cold. I repeated, "I can't hear you. Speak up." The line suddenly went silent. Then it clicked and died. I exhaled in frustration. My fingers were trembling, and my throat felt dry. I started checking the outside of the booth. The phone line was severed. The cable was cut and hung loose at the back. There was no way this phone should have any power or connection. That discovery freaked me out even more. I stepped back, looked at the broken cable, and then at the phone. I couldn't find a logical explanation. My stomach felt tight, and my head was spinning. I told my uncle about this again the next morning. He sighed, said I was too obsessed, and warned me to drop it. He didn't think there was any point in stirring up old rumors. He never told me exactly what he'd heard, but his face looked pale when I pressed him. He changed the subject every time. I noticed a few people around town giving me odd looks. A couple of folks asked me if I'd talk to whoever's calling, then laughed like it was a joke, but it felt forced. The tension kept building in me. I started losing sleep. I'd wake up in the middle of the night wondering if the phone was ringing at that moment. On the sixth night, I forced myself to stay in bed, but my mind wouldn't settle. I got up, put on my coat, and headed to the corner. It was around midnight. The streets were empty, the sky was clear, and the moonlight was dull against the buildings. I reached the booth and stood there. Nothing happened for a while. I could see my breath in the cold air. My fingers were going numb, so I slipped them into my pockets. Right when I decided to turn back, the phone rang. That sound cut right through me. I flinched, then pulled the door open. I picked up the phone and said, "Hello?" My voice cracked a bit. The breathing was back. It was rhythmic, almost deliberate. Then it stopped, and I heard a faint rustling sound. It was like someone was moving the phone on the other end. I said, "Who the hell are you?" I tried to keep my voice steady. No response. Just that rustling and low static. Then the line clicked again. Nothing. I slammed the receiver down. I was fed up with the tension. My chest felt tight and my mind was buzzing. I kicked the side of the booth in anger. It wobbled, and the glass rattled. I felt a sting in my toe from the impact. Then I heard a soft thud, like something fell inside the phone. I looked around for any sign of movement, but the street was deserted. The next day, I found a local repairman who sometimes works with old telephone equipment. I told him there was a weird phone booth that seemed to be ringing out of nowhere. He gave me a puzzled look, but agreed to check it with me after he closed his shop. Around 7 that evening, we walked to the booth. He brought some tools and a flashlight. We opened the phone's panel and saw the wires inside. They were corroded. The main cable outside was cut clean. He tried hooking up a small device to see if there was any current. Nothing registered. 0. He shrugged and said, "There's no way this thing's getting power." I stood there staring at the receiver, expecting it to ring the moment he left. He stayed about 10 more minutes, shaking his head. Then he left, confused. When I went back that night, I half expected no ring because someone had messed around with the wiring. For a full hour, I waited in the cold, pacing in front of the booth. A stray cat passed by, gave me a quick glance, and bolted. A truck rumbled by on the main road, headlights sweeping the sidewalk. Nothing else happened. I started to feel relieved, thinking maybe the calls had stopped. Then, right as I was about to walk off, the phone rang again. My stomach dropped. It was the same loud ring echoing on the empty street. I stepped into the booth and snatched the receiver. This time I pressed it tight to my ear. I didn't say anything. I just listened. My heart hammered. At first it was quiet. Then I heard a faint inhale, like someone on the other side was nervous. I said, "I know this phone is disconnected. How are you calling me?" There was a pause. Then the breathing continued. It got louder, and I noticed my hand trembling. The metal cord of the phone felt cold against my wrist. My mind raced. I pictured someone standing nearby with a cell phone messing with me. But I saw no one. The street was still empty. The booth felt like a sealed box around me. I said, "Why don't you talk?" My voice was shaky. Another pause. Then I heard something that sounded like a quiet grunt. It sent a chill down my spine. I felt sweat beading on my forehead again. "Tell me what you want," I insisted, raising my voice. I heard the click and the line went dead. My breath came out in short gasps. My heart rate was way up. I looked at the phone in my hand. It was still as lifeless as ever, no dial tone. My pulse throbbed in my temples. I stepped out of the booth and looked around. No sign of movement. A few streetlights flickered. My legs felt weak, like I'd run a marathon. I trudged home, feeling the cold sink into my bones. Over the next few days, I tried ignoring the booth. I avoided that corner, took other routes, and busied myself with work. My sleep improved a little, but I kept thinking about the calls. After all the rumors, the severed cable, the silent nights, I still had no explanation. Part of me felt drawn back, like an itch I couldn't scratch. Another part wanted me to forget I ever picked up that phone. I was doing okay for almost a week. Then, late on a Saturday, I heard it. I was lying in bed, half awake, and I swore I heard that phone ring in my head. I sat up, heart racing. I told myself it was imagination, but I couldn't let it go. I got dressed, slipped on my boots, and jogged out into the cold. It was around midnight again. When I reached the corner, I saw the booth standing under a flickering streetlight. For a few seconds, it was silent. Then it rang. That sharp, piercing ring. My hands shook. I forced myself to go inside again. I picked up the receiver. The breathing was there, quiet at first, then heavier. I closed my eyes for a moment. "Why do you keep calling here?" I asked, my voice tense. The breathing slowed, like the person on the other end was listening. I said, "I can't keep coming here. What do you want from me?" My throat felt dry. The line was quiet except for that breathing. Then it started to fade, as if the person was moving away from the phone. I clenched my fist around the receiver, feeling a throb in my knuckles. "I'm done," I said in a low voice. "I'm done answering." I put the phone back on the hook and stepped out of the booth. My mind felt scrambled, but my body felt certain of one thing. I couldn't keep chasing this. Whatever was happening, it wasn't something I could fix or understand. I walked away without looking back. The night was cold, and my breath formed small clouds around my face. I headed home, my heart still pounding, but I felt a sense of relief at the same time. I needed to stop letting that broken phone control me. If it rang, I'd let it ring. I had nothing left to say. I don't have all the answers about that booth. I never found out who or what was on the other end. People around town still give me strange looks sometimes. Maybe they know more than they're letting on. Maybe they're just as clueless as I am. But I decided I'm not going to stand there night after night, chasing a voice that never speaks. If I hear that ring again, I'll leave it alone. That's how I stay sane. If something beyond logic is messing around, that's not my problem anymore. Let that phone ring all it wants. I'm not picking up again. Picking. I walked into that mansion on a Tuesday morning expecting nothing more than a standard inspection. The caretaker had called me in, saying they needed a professional restorer to evaluate some very old wooden doors. I thought it would be a few hours of looking for rot, checking hinges, and writing a short report. I had done this kind of job 100 times, but from the moment I stepped through the front entrance, I sensed a heavy quiet in the corridors. There was a stale smell in the air, like the place had been closed for too long. My jacket felt tight around my shoulders and the floor creaked under my shoes. I remember wiping sweat from my forehead as I walked down the hallway toward the doors. The caretaker was a tall guy with a stiff posture. He led me to a side corridor at the far end of the house. There, 3 large wooden doors stood. They looked old, really old. Their surfaces were rough, the color of dark oak, and they had long iron hinges that were starting to rust. I ran my hands over the wood. It felt cold to the touch and had a slight grainy texture. The caretaker told me these doors had been there for at least a century, maybe more. My job was to see if they could be preserved or if we needed to replace them entirely. I leaned in and examined the first door. I squatted down, ran my fingers along the bottom edge and looked for evidence of termites or cracks. I tapped the panel to test its solidity. I heard a faint echo. No major damage, just some superficial scrapes. I wrote some notes in a small notepad I carry. The caretaker waited behind me, shifting on his feet. He seemed impatient or uneasy. I didn't pay much attention to him at that moment because I was focused on the job. Then I saw something unusual near the middle of the door. A barely visible engraving ran in a thin line. It was so faint I almost missed it. I bent closer, squinting, and traced the outline with my fingertip. It looked like a single word, carved in a delicate script. The letters were shallow, and I couldn't read them right away. I tilted my head to see if the light from the overhead fixture would help. The caretaker asked if I found anything, and I just raised my hand to signal him to wait. I realized it was some foreign word. I tried to sound it out in my head. It had an odd combination of letters. It felt unnatural on my tongue. I slowly read it out loud, just to see how it might sound. The moment I said the word, I heard a short whisper, as if someone exhaled in my ear. It made the hair on my arm stand up. I looked over my shoulder expecting to see someone, but the corridor was empty except for the caretaker, who was at least 10 feet away. I felt a tightness in my chest for a moment, like I'd stepped into cold water. I shook it off, thinking it might be my imagination or a draft passing through the hallway. I turned back to the door. The engraving seemed different now. The shape of the letters looked shifted, as if they had rearranged themselves. My eyes went wide, and I leaned in closer to confirm I wasn't seeing things. It definitely wasn't the same word I had read a second ago. My heart started to pound in my chest. My hands felt clammy, and I wiped my palm on my pants. The caretaker asked if everything was all right. I just nodded, not wanting to sound crazy. I told him I needed more time. I glanced at the caretaker and motioned for him to give me some space. I'm not sure why, but I didn't want to explain what I was noticing. He walked a few steps away, looking at his phone or something. I took a deep breath, then read the new set of letters out loud again, trying to pronounce them carefully. The moment I finished, I heard that whisper again. This time, it felt like it traveled from one end of the corridor to the other. A ripple of cold air brushed my neck. I could see my hand shaking a little, so I gripped my notepad to steady myself. I looked at the door once more. The word changed again, shifting in place like it was alive. My pulse throbbed in my ears, and I could feel my teeth clenching. My mind raced with questions, but I had no answers. I've worked on a lot of antique pieces and encountered plenty of strange details, but nothing like this. I touched the door, placing my palm flat against the wood. My hand tingled, a slight electric buzz running through my skin. I pulled back, startled. The caretaker didn't seem to notice any of this. Maybe he was too far away or distracted. I decided to keep going with my inspection, trying to act like everything was normal. I moved to the second door. It was similar in style, with the same kind of iron hardware. I checked the edges, the hinges, and the panels. I ran my hand across the surface. The wood felt sturdy, well preserved. Then I spotted another faint marking, this time near the top. I had to stretch to see it. The letters were different from the first door's letters. Again, I read them out loud. I instantly heard that same whisper. It rushed past me, tickling my ears. I took a step back, bumping into a small table in the hall. The caretaker gave me a quick look, but I waved him off. My body felt tense. My mouth was dry. The doors seemed to be reacting to my voice. I felt a sweat break out at my temples. I couldn't deny it anymore. Every time I read those words, something happened. The sound wasn't natural, and the letters on the door appeared to shift. I felt an urge to figure out what was going on, but I also felt a knot in my stomach. I kept reminding myself I was there for a professional job, not some ghost hunt. I took a sip of water from my bottle, then wiped my lips with the back of my hand. I ran a finger along the second door's carving again, gently. As soon as I touched it, the door's surface changed where my fingertip pressed. A shallow groove formed like a fresh scratch. It reminded me of torn skin, but I tried not to dwell on that. I jerked my hand away and stared at the door. I reached out again and touched a different spot. The same thing happened. The wood warped as if it was bruising under my fingers. My heart pounded. My legs felt restless, and I wanted to pace around, but the hallway was narrow. I stuck to short steps back and forth, trying to think. I turned toward the caretaker and told him I wanted to take a closer look at the third door. He nodded, still appearing bored or restless. The third door was at the end of the corridor near a large window. Dust covered the glass, blocking most of the sunlight. The door had a large metal handle, shaped in a simple rectangular design. I crouched down, shining my flashlight along the seams. I felt the wood carefully. I expected to find another faint word. After a moment, I spotted one right next to the handle. It was the same style of carved text, very fine and shallow. I hesitated, then read it in a low voice, barely above a whisper. Immediately, I sensed that presence again. The caretaker seemed not to notice anything, but I heard it. A faint breath, or maybe a low hum, traveled across the hall. I glanced at the caretaker and noticed he was still looking at his phone. My forehead felt damp. I realized I was sweating, but my fingertips felt cold. The letters on the third door twisted into a new shape, just like on the others. I placed my hand on the handle, which felt unusually cool, almost icy. My fingers tingled. I tried the handle, but the door was locked. I pressed my palm against the wood, and again I felt that slight buzz traveling up my arm. I jerked back. A few seconds later, I spotted a fresh mark on the door's surface. It looked like a thin scratch that followed the outline of my hand. My stomach tightened, and I felt lightheaded. I moved back to the first door, determined to see if the same phenomenon would happen again. The faint word was there, shifted from its original form. I didn't read it out loud this time. I reached out carefully, touching a corner of the engraving. Instantly, the surface dented inward, leaving a small indentation. The caretaker must have heard the wood creak because he asked if everything was fine. My voice felt shaky, but I said yes. I pretended to scribble some notes, trying to act like I was measuring the depth of the wood. I decided I needed some answers. I called the caretaker over and asked if anyone else had worked on these doors recently, or if there was any historical record about them. He shrugged and said he didn't know. He mentioned that a few previous owners had tried to fix parts of the mansion, but never these doors. He said some folks in the past had complained about weird noises in the corridors, but no one had done any real investigation. I felt a lump in my throat, but thanked him and asked if I could have some privacy to focus on the doors. He looked at me oddly, then stepped away toward the main entrance hall. I was alone in that corridor. My breathing was steady but shallow. My eyes flicked between the three doors, all of them with strange engravings. I approached the second door again, noticing the fresh scratch from before. It was definitely new, and it followed the path of my touch. I considered leaving. Part of me wanted to walk out, say I had enough data to do a written report and never come back. But my curiosity was too strong. I pulled out a small magnifying glass to inspect the carvings. The wood around them seemed clean, no sign of mold or insect damage. The carving was so precise, too fine to have been done with a normal chisel. I stepped back and read the second door's word out loud again, in a slow, clear voice. The whisper came instantly, circling the hallway. My heart pounded, and I felt short of breath. I clenched my fist, noticing a tingling in my knuckles. My legs felt unsteady, so I braced myself against the wall. I turned around, expecting to see something, but there was nothing there. The corridor was still empty. When I looked back at the door, the letters had shifted again, forming new shapes. The carving looked deeper now, as if someone had pressed a brand into the wood. I walked backward until I reached the window near the third door. I tried to gather my thoughts. I kept the caretaker in the corner of my vision, though he was far down the main hall, his back turned. My heart was still racing. I needed to calm down, so I took deep breaths. I listened for any movement, but only heard my own breathing. The overhead light buzzed softly. I felt a drip of sweat running down my temple. My entire body felt tense, and I was aware of every creak of the floor. After a few minutes, I decided I had enough. I wasn't going to solve this in one day. I returned to the first door, ran my hand over it as gently as I could, and tried to see if it would react again. Sure enough, the wood rippled under my fingers, leaving a faint trail like a scar. My stomach tightened. I wanted to get out of there. I walked down the corridor to the caretaker, told him I had enough information for now and that I'd prepare a report. He asked if I was feeling all right because I looked pale. I lied and said I was just tired. As he led me back to the main entrance, my eyes kept darting back toward those doors. I felt like they were watching me somehow. I rubbed my arms, still feeling that electric buzz under my skin. My fingers kept trembling and my thoughts were racing with everything I'd seen. The caretaker opened the front door, and I stepped outside into the daylight. The fresh air hit me, and I took a long breath. I told the caretaker I'd be in touch soon. He locked the mansion doors behind me, and I heard the echo of the metal bolt sliding into place. It sounded final. As I walked to my car, I realized my hands were shaking so much I almost dropped my keys. I don't know what those engravings mean or how the doors do what they do, but I know I wasn't imagining it. My body still tingled, and I could still hear those whispers in my mind. I just stood by my car for a moment, staring at the silent building, wondering what I'd gotten myself into. Then I got in, turned the key in the ignition, and left. Not sure if I wanted to come back or forget about it altogether, but I knew I wouldn't forget. My body felt marked by those doors, and part of me was afraid that the doors might remember me too. I first noticed something was wrong the moment I unlocked the barn door and felt a strong draft hit me in the chest, even though there was no breeze outside. The air inside felt thick. My lungs tightened. My skin tingled. I smelled burnt wax and something bitter that stung the back of my throat. I flicked on my flashlight and stepped in, not expecting to see much. Instead, I found a cramped space with walls that looked damp under the beam of light. My boots left footprints on the dirt floor. Then I saw the altar in the far corner, hidden behind a few piles of wood and a rusted wheelbarrow. My stomach knotted. There were candles burning on it, despite the barn being locked. I bought this rural property a few weeks ago. I needed a change, and the price was right. The house itself looked decent enough, though it needed some work. The agent told me there was an old barn out back that could be used for storage or turned into a workshop. I never expected it to contain anything unusual. During the official inspection, I barely glanced inside. The floor was covered in straw, and the beams in the ceiling looked solid. I didn't notice any leaks or structural problems. I also didn't see that altar. Maybe it was hidden behind all the junk, or maybe I just didn't look close enough. I stood there on my first night of proper exploration, staring at the flickering flames. The candles were arranged in a rough circle. There was a small wooden bowl in the center, full of some kind of dark liquid that gave off a sour smell. Dried herbs were scattered around. My nostrils flared. The odor was sharp, and it mixed with the damp air, making me feel uneasy. I could hear a faint crackling from the wicks, and the flame tips danced in a steady rhythm. I stepped forward. I wanted to see if there was something else on that makeshift table. It looked like someone had nailed a rough plank to two short logs, creating a rudimentary altar. The table was stained with wax drippings. The leftover wax had pooled in lumps around the base of the candles. The surface of the table felt warm, like it had been near a small fire for a long time. I couldn't understand how the candles stayed lit without running out of wax. Some of them were almost new, but others looked half-burned. I reached out to touch one of the half-burned candles, and a drop of hot wax landed on my hand. It stung, and I jerked back. I cursed under my breath and wiped the wax away on my jeans. I decided to snuff out the candles. I pinched the first wick between my moistened fingers, wincing when a bit of heat passed through. I did the same with the others until the barn was mostly dark, illuminated only by the light from my flashlight. I felt a chill on my skin right after the last flame went out. The smell of smoke and bitter herbs clung to my clothes. I grabbed the door handle and stepped outside, locking the barn behind me. I stood in the yard, feeling the cool evening air against my face. My heart thudded in my chest. I tried to rationalize what I had found. Maybe someone was squatting here. Maybe the previous owner used the barn for some odd rituals. I had no clue. I decided to walk around the property to see if there were any signs of trespassing. I didn't see footprints near the barn door or any broken windows. The door lock was intact, and it only opened with my key. I went to bed that night with a sense of unease. My mind replayed images of those candles flickering in the dark. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured that wooden bowl and the shapes of the herbs scattered around. I woke up a few times thinking I heard rustling in the hallway, but the house was empty. The next morning, I decided to check the barn in daylight. The sun was bright. I walked across the grass toward the barn, noticing that the dew on the ground sparkled. My boots crushed the wet blades, and I noticed faint footprints left in the grass. They were mine from the night before. Nobody else's prints appeared anywhere near the barn. I took out my key and unlocked the door. The smell hit me again, just as strong as before. The candles were burning, every single one. I could see fresh wax dripping down their sides. The air felt muggy inside, like a sauna that had been sealed for hours. My pulse raced. My throat went dry. I looked around for any sign that the door or windows had been tampered with. Nothing. No open windows, no footprints in the dirt, no tracks on the floor. I glanced at the walls. They seemed to glisten with beads of moisture. Tiny drops of water trickled down the wood. I saw faint wisps of steam or vapor rising in spots, drifting near the ceiling. My flashlight was still in my back pocket, so I turned it on and aimed the beam at the corners. The corners were damp. The nails and hinges had a thin layer of rust. A few spider webs clung to the beams, but I didn't see a single spider. I took a step toward the altar. My legs felt unsteady. The candles hissed. The tips of the flames flickered like they sensed my presence. I felt goosebumps on my arms. I could hear my own heartbeat. I forced myself to reach down and pinch out the flames one by one. The second I did, I smelled a stronger burst of that bitter herbal scent. It made my eyes water. I coughed. When the last candle was out, the barn felt colder again, and I saw my breath in the air. I left the barn and locked it up. I had to figure out what was causing this. I walked back to the house. I rummaged through a few old boxes left in the living room by the previous owner. I found some old receipts, a few letters, and some torn posters advertising local events from years ago. Nothing explained anything about the barn. I tried calling the real estate agent, but she was unavailable. I left a message asking if she knew anything about the barn's history. Then I decided to go into town to buy supplies to remove the altar. I needed thick gloves, maybe some heavy trash bags. I also wanted extra locks. When I got to the hardware store, I asked the clerk if he knew anything about local stories involving old barns. He shrugged and said sometimes you find weird stuff left behind. People practice strange hobbies, or they store all kinds of junk. He recommended a strong cleaner for removing mildew and suggested I get a dehumidifier if the place was too damp. I thanked him, grabbed what I needed, and drove back. By the time I reached the property, it was late afternoon. The sky was cloudy, and it looked like it might rain. I dropped the supplies in the house, then headed straight to the barn. My hand shook a bit while unlocking the door. The moment I stepped inside, I saw the candles were lit again, as if I'd never touched them. My jaw clenched. My stomach churned. My eyes stung from the mix of burnt wax and bitter herbs. The floor felt stickier than before, and the walls glistened with more moisture. I lit a lantern I brought, setting it on a hook near the entrance. I refused to stand in the dark. I wanted to see everything clearly. I turned to the altar. The flames on those candles were steady. I studied the wooden bowl. The liquid inside was dark, with fragments of dried herbs floating on the surface. I could see condensation on the rim of the bowl. It smelled sharper than before. I wondered if it was water, oil, or something else. My mind raced through possibilities, but I had no solid answers. I pulled on the thick gloves I'd bought. Then I grabbed the candles one by one and dropped them into a metal pail. I poured some water over them to ensure they couldn't stay lit. When I lifted the wooden bowl, I realized it was heavier than I expected. The liquid sloshed around and a few drops splattered on the dirt floor. I carried it outside, dumping it behind the barn. The odor lingered in my nostrils. I rinsed the bowl with a bottle of water and placed it near the pile of wood scraps. Then I went back in. The barn was dim, and the lantern's glow created shifting shadows on the walls. I felt sweat bead on my forehead. My eyes scanned the corners and the rafters. I didn't want any surprises. My throat tightened. My heartbeat thumped in my ears. I started yanking down bits of fabric or dried leaves that looked suspicious. I cleared off the makeshift table. I stuffed everything into a large trash bag: the herbs, the leftover candle stubs, the lumps of melted wax. I didn't want anything left that might invite more of this nonsense. A rush of cool air passed over me, and I dropped the bag. I spun around, expecting to see someone behind me. Nothing. The barn was silent except for my own breathing. I forced myself to keep going. I set the bag near the door. I scrubbed the table with the cleaning solution, wiping away waxy residue. The smell still clung to the air. After a while, I couldn't take the fumes. I needed a break. I locked up the barn, put the trash bag in the back of my truck, and walked around the exterior. The walls looked normal from the outside. The wood was old but not rotted. There weren't any hidden entrances. No windows large enough for a person to crawl through. Everything was as solid as it appeared when I first bought the place. I paused to listen for any unusual sounds. I only heard the wind in the trees. The sun was setting, and the sky took on a gray hue. I went back inside the house and decided to eat something. My appetite was weak, but I forced down a sandwich. My hands were shaky while I poured water into a glass. My mouth felt dry. I kept checking the windows, half expecting to see someone skulking around outside. Nothing moved. I told myself the barn was cleared out. The candles were destroyed. The bowl was emptied. It should be fine now. I tried to distract myself by flipping through some old magazines. My mind drifted back to the barn, picturing the shimmering walls and the swirling herbs in that bowl. I thought about staying up all night to keep watch, but I felt exhausted. I finally dragged myself to bed, leaving a lamp on in the hallway. That night I tossed and turned. I dreamed of footsteps scuffing against the barn's floor. I imagined the sound of a match being struck, the hiss of a flame catching the wick. I woke up in a cold sweat around dawn. I didn't hear anything in the house, but my nerves were on edge. My fingers twitched as I pulled on my boots. I grabbed a flashlight and a crowbar before heading outside. The early light painted the yard in pale shadows. My breath formed small clouds in the air. I trudged through the dew and paused at the barn door. My heart thumped harder. I felt a tightness in my chest. I unlocked the door and swung it open. The smell of burnt wax and bitter herbs slapped me in the face. The candles were back on the altar, all lit, arranged in the same circle as before. I froze, my grip on the crowbar tightening. I saw the same wooden bowl in the middle, filled again with that liquid. Everything looked like I had never touched it. The table was stained, and fresh wax dripped onto the wood. The moisture on the walls was heavier. Dense steam floated near the ceiling. I tasted panic in my mouth like a metallic tang. The barn felt alive in some way I couldn't explain. My vision blurred with shock. My body felt hot despite the morning chill. I took a step inside. The dirt floor squished under my boots as if it was soaked. I could hear droplets trickling down the walls. My chest tightened. I forced myself to focus on the plan, remove everything, again. But this time, I wasn't sure if it would even help. I could see the flames dancing, mocking me, refusing to be extinguished for good. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. I clutched the crowbar, my thoughts reeled. I tried to slow my breathing. I stood there, deciding if I should smash the altar. I felt a sudden wave of dizziness. My pulse pounded in my ears. There was a creeping sense that the barn was watching me, waiting to see what I would do. I stared at the candles. They flickered and hissed. My limbs felt heavy. I realized I was shaking, my knees unsteady. A drop of sweat rolled down my forehead, stinging my eye. I blinked rapidly. I took another step. My boots left muddy prints. I gripped the crowbar so hard my knuckles turned white. The bitter smell of herbs filled my lungs. I thought of the locked doors, the empty yard, and the absence of any other footprints. The barn felt sealed off from everything else. I swallowed hard, lifted the crowbar, and prepared to bring it crashing down on that table. My muscles tensed, my heart thundered. In that moment, I knew there was no walking away from this. Something was here, and it wouldn't leave on its own. I stared at the candles, feeling them burn into my vision, and I took a deep, unsteady breath. Then I raised the crowbar higher, determined to put an end to whatever was feeding those flames. I was drawn to that old mirror the second I saw it at the antique fair. I remember the crowd around me, the noise of people bargaining for dusty lamps and chipped porcelain figures. I had no real interest in antiques. I was just bored and needed something to do. But my eyes locked onto that small pocket mirror with its intricate metal frame. The surface looked a bit cloudy, like it needed a good wipe. I don't know why I had that urge to reach out and pick it up. I just did. And once I held it, I felt this odd pulse of curiosity. It made my stomach tighten in a way I couldn't ignore. The vendor didn't have much to say about it, just that it was old and probably from some estate sale. I handed over the cash without even trying to haggle. I got home later that evening feeling tired from all the walking around the fair. My apartment was quiet, the air a bit stale from being closed all day. I tossed my keys on the small table by the door, shrugged off my jacket, and headed to the kitchen for some water. My mind kept going back to that mirror. It was still in the small paper bag I'd carried home. I pulled it out and set it on the coffee table. The carved patterns around the edges looked detailed. I ran my finger over them and felt tiny grooves and ridges. I noticed a few scuffs, but they didn't bother me. I decided I'd clean the glass later. I ended up using it for the first time that night. I was in my bedroom, sitting on the edge of my bed. The overhead light was dim, but I could see well enough. I held up the mirror to check if there was any scratch that might distort my reflection. At first glance, everything seemed fine. Then I tilted it a bit to see the angle of the light, and that's when I caught something behind me. I jerked my head around. My room was empty. The door was closed. Nobody else was there. It was just a split second, but I was sure I saw a faint outline of someone standing in the corner. My pulse sped up, and a flush of warmth spread through my chest. I told myself it was just my eyes playing tricks. The mirror's glass was old after all. Over the next few days, I tried not to think about it. I kept that mirror on top of my dresser. I didn't look into it much, but I occasionally picked it up to inspect the frame or rub away any smudges. On the third day, I was getting dressed for work and needed to check if my shirt collar was straight. I used the mirror for just a moment, but I froze. There, behind my reflection, stood a figure. It was more distinct this time. It looked like a man, but he seemed bent forward. I couldn't see his face clearly, but his lips were curved in a strange grin. My scalp tingled. I twisted around to look over my shoulder. Nobody was in the room. My chest felt tight, and my heart pounded. I set the mirror down with a thump, my hand trembling. I tried to go about my day, but my thoughts kept returning to that image. That grin bothered me the most. It wasn't a friendly smile. It seemed wrong, like he was amused by something he shouldn't be. When I got home that evening, I went straight to the dresser. My mirror lay there, quiet and unassuming. I stared at it for a while, unsure if I wanted to pick it up again. My instincts told me to ignore it, but curiosity won out. I raised it to my eye level and looked into it. For a second, I only saw my own face and the rest of the bedroom behind me. Then he flickered into view. He was closer this time, maybe 3 steps behind me. His grin looked even wider, and I noticed a faint twitch in his shoulders. I heard no sound, but I felt this prickly sensation at the back of my neck. I put the mirror down again, feeling my forehead break out in sweat. That night, I had trouble sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured that figure's bent posture and that disturbing smile. I got up around midnight and decided to put the mirror away in a drawer. I didn't want to look at it if I needed something from the dresser. I placed it inside, under some socks, and shut it. That gave me a small sense of relief. But I still tossed and turned for hours, my mind replaying that brief glimpse of him standing so close. The next morning, I felt groggy and irritated. I grabbed a cup of coffee and tried to shake off my fatigue. I nearly left the apartment without the mirror, but some part of me felt drawn to it again. I told myself I wanted to show a friend at work, maybe get his opinion on whether the reflection was some weird quirk of the old glass. I dug it out of the drawer, holding it carefully. My palms felt slick with sweat. When I dared to look at it again, I only saw my reflection. No one else was there. I exhaled in relief. I wrapped it in a small cloth and stuffed it in my bag. I didn't end up showing it to my friend. I couldn't figure out how to bring it up. "Hey, check out this old mirror that shows creepy figures sometimes." It sounded ridiculous in my head. By the time I left work, I had convinced myself I should just get rid of it. I thought about tossing it in the dumpster behind my building, but there was this strange pull. I couldn't bring myself to do it. I went home with the mirror still in my bag. That night, I sat in my living room with all the lights on. I placed the mirror on the coffee table and watched it for a long time, waiting to see if anything would happen on its own. Nothing changed. It was just a small old mirror. I picked it up slowly. My hand trembled a bit. I lifted it to my face. The moment I looked into it, that figure was there, behind me, almost at my shoulder. My whole body went cold. His shape was slender, and I could see his fingers moving like he was eager to do something I couldn't understand. His grin seemed to grow. I dropped the mirror onto the table. My stomach churned, and my skin broke out in goosebumps. I rubbed my eyes and blinked a few times, then looked around the room. Still empty. But my heart wouldn't stop hammering. Over the next few days, I tried different things. I tried cleaning the mirror with glass cleaner. I tried shining a flashlight into it. I even tried pressing my hand to the surface to feel for anything unusual. Nothing explained the figure. Every time I held the mirror at the right angle to see behind me, he was there, inching closer. By the 5th day, I could almost make out the texture of his shirt. It looked tattered. I could see the wrinkles in his face. He was older than I first thought. His eyes were dark, and I felt exposed whenever they locked onto mine. I started having trouble eating. My appetite was gone. I'd sit at the kitchen table picking at my food, too anxious to focus on anything else. I considered getting rid of it again. I took it out to my car, planning to drive somewhere far and leave it. But I hesitated. I knew that if I just ditched it, I might never shake off the feeling that he was still out there, attached to me somehow. So I brought it back in. My thoughts bounced around in my head. I felt a creeping dread that wouldn't let me rest. My nights were restless and my days were full of nervous tension. I felt on edge even when I wasn't looking into the mirror. Sometimes I'd catch myself glancing over my shoulder when I walked past a window or a shiny surface. One evening, I worked up the courage to keep watching him in the mirror for a longer period. I turned on every light in the apartment again. I checked every corner to make sure I was alone. Then I sat in a chair with the mirror in my hands. I raised it slowly, breathing through my mouth to stay calm. He was there, his eyes fixed on me, his grin stretching across his face. My pulse pounded in my ears. I refused to look away. He didn't move fast, but there was a slow shift in his body language, like he was stepping forward. My hands shook. I could feel sweat trickling down my sides. I couldn't hear any sound from him. but I felt this pounding in my chest that got heavier with each second. After what felt like forever, I couldn't take it anymore. I lowered the mirror, breathing fast, my throat tight. I set it on the table again and covered it with a towel. I leaned back and tried to calm down. My mind felt scattered. My legs were tense and my hands still shook. I got up, poured a glass of water and gulped it down. I paced around the room, feeling the goosebumps fade in and out on my skin. I decided to keep the mirror covered. For a while that helped. I still knew it was in the apartment, but not seeing it made it easier to get through the day. I forced myself to go to work, focus on tasks, and stay out of the apartment as much as possible. At night, I stared at the towel-covered mirror and wondered if he was still there, waiting. My chest tightened whenever I thought about it, and I fought off the urge to check. A few times I grabbed the mirror, intending to smash it or throw it out the window, but I always stopped. The idea of breaking it made me nervous. I had no logical reason for that fear. I just felt it in my gut, like something bad would happen if I shattered it. I lasted like that for about a week. Then one night, I heard a faint scraping sound in my living room. I froze. It was soft, but it stood out in the silence of my apartment. I crept toward the sofa, feeling my heart hammering so hard that my vision blurred. When I reached the coffee table, I saw that the towel had slipped off the mirror. It lay half on the floor. The mirror was face up. I could see my lamp's reflection in the glass. My stomach turned to ice. I slowly bent down and picked it up. My fingertips felt numb. I raised it, expecting to see the figure behind me. Instead, I only saw my living room. There was no sign of him at that moment. My mouth was dry and I exhaled in a shaky gasp. I didn't get any sleep that night. I sat on my couch, holding the mirror in my lap. I kept it turned away from me, not wanting to look. I found myself dozing off now and then, only to jerk awake at the slightest noise. My shoulders ached from tension, and my eyes burned from lack of rest. Around dawn, I finally decided to check again. I lifted the mirror, bracing myself. The figure appeared right behind my reflection, so close that I could see his eyes flick up to mine. A chill spread through my entire body. His grin looked sharper. I couldn't take it. I set the mirror aside, my breath coming in short bursts. I felt cornered in my own home. Right now, I'm sitting at my kitchen table with the mirror next to me. I keep glancing at it, half expecting it to move by itself. My arms feel weak, and my stomach is in knots. I have no clear plan. Part of me wants to seal it in a box and bury it somewhere. Another part of me thinks I should wrap it up and leave it at the thrift store. But I'm afraid I might see him if I close my eyes tonight. I'm afraid the next time I look in any reflective surface, he'll be there, that same grin on his face. I can't explain any of this, and I'm too keyed up to pretend it's my imagination. My plan for now is to keep the mirror wrapped and out of sight. I might call someone I trust and ask for advice. I'm not thinking about exorcisms or anything supernatural. I just want to feel safe in my own space. My hands won't stop trembling. My skin feels clammy. My head is pounding. I can't even relax with the lights on. Every shadow makes me jump. I keep scanning my peripheral vision, waiting to see a flash of movement. I need to do something soon. This can't go on. But for the moment, I'm stuck with this silent fear that won't let me breathe properly. The mirror is right there, an arm's length away, holding the image of that hunched man with his eerie grin, inching closer each time I look. And I can't escape the feeling that if I slip up, he'll be close enough to reach out and touch me. I bought this property last month. I didn't expect much when I first saw the for sale sign by the dirt road. The house is small, painted in a pale color that is chipped off in places. The barn stands at the far end, a bit lopsided but still sturdy enough for basic storage. The previous owner left some old tools, a few broken crates, and a lot of dusty corners I haven't had time to clean. I figured I'd spend my evenings watching the sunset behind the hills. There's a large cornfield that stretches out behind the barn. That was my main interest because I thought I might make a modest income from it. But something caught my eye the first time I walked through those rows of corn. Right in the center of the field, there's a scarecrow. Its clothes look torn, but the way they're arranged seems too neat. The jacket collar sits straight against the scarecrow's neck. The trousers aren't sagging. The hat doesn't look randomly placed. It seems like someone has been checking on it, adjusting it. I didn't pay much attention at first. I assumed the scarecrow was just a leftover from whoever owned this place decades ago. I walked past it on my first day of exploring. It looked like it was leaning forward a bit with its head pointed toward the farmhouse. I remember feeling a chill in my stomach, but I didn't know why. It was just a bundle of straw and sticks after all. Its face had some faded burlap with bits of straw poking out here and there. The eyes looked like black buttons, but one of them was missing a piece, so it had a jagged shape. The mouth was stitched into a crooked line. I glanced at it for a moment, then kept walking. It didn't do anything. It didn't move. It just stood there. A few nights later, I sat in my living room, trying to relax. The windows were open because the summer air was still warm. I heard the wind blowing through the cornfield. Usually that sound is peaceful, like a soft rustling, but it felt different that night. It felt like there was a rhythm to it, almost like a whisper. I couldn't make out words. It was just a faint noise, but it raised the hairs on my arms. I went to the back porch and looked out over the field. The moonlight was weak, but I could still see the rows of tall corn swaying. In the middle, that silhouette was standing. The scarecrow's shape was clear enough to spot. I squinted, and for a second I thought it was turned in my direction. I mean completely turned, not just leaning. But I couldn't be sure. It was too dark and too far away. I tried to ignore it, but the feeling stayed with me. My heart was beating faster than normal. I heard my own breath coming in short bursts. I told myself I was just tired. I went back inside and locked the door. I told myself it was just a piece of old cloth and straw tied to a wooden stake. I eventually fell asleep on the couch. The next morning, I went outside to check the field before heading to town for supplies. I walked through the rows, listening to the crunch of dirt under my boots. When I reached the center, I saw the scarecrow again, but something seemed off. The hat was tilted more to one side, like it was aiming directly at me. The arms looked closer to its body, almost like it had shifted its stance. I stared at it for a few seconds. I felt my forehead break into a sweat, even though the air wasn't that hot yet. I reached out and touched the scarecrow's jacket. It felt dusty, and the stitching on the sleeves was loose. I checked the post it was tied to, making sure it hadn't come loose. Everything looked normal at first glance. Then I noticed footprints in the dirt around the scarecrow's base. They weren't my footprints. They were smaller, almost like scuff marks left by shoes that had dragged slightly. They led away from the scarecrow, disappearing into the corn rows. I followed them for a short distance, but they disappeared in the tangled roots and dried soil. My stomach lurched with unease, but I told myself it was just the wind, or maybe some local kids messing around. Still, I didn't see any kids, and I hadn't heard anybody on my property. I went to town, bought some basic groceries, and talked to a few neighbors. They told me the property had been empty for at least 20 years. Nobody mentioned a scarecrow. Nobody mentioned strange footprints. I didn't bring it up either. I didn't want people thinking I was paranoid on my first week in the area. That evening, I sat on the porch again. I looked at the cornfield. The sun was going down. The clouds turned orange and pink, and I could hear insects chirping in the grass. The smell of the dried corn husks drifted across the yard. I wanted to walk out there and check on the scarecrow again, but I decided to wait until daylight. The memory of those footprints bothered me, and I didn't feel comfortable wandering through the field after dark. Around 10, I locked up and went to bed. I left the window cracked open for air. I hoped I'd sleep through the night without any strange noises, but around midnight I woke up. There was a distant rustling sound, more forceful than before. I got up and looked outside. The moon was bright enough to illuminate the yard. I couldn't see much beyond the first few rows of corn, but I heard a soft thump, like something heavy hitting the ground. My pulse raced. I grabbed a flashlight, slipped on my boots, and walked out to the porch. The night air felt thick. My legs felt tense, and I had trouble keeping my breathing steady. I shined the flashlight along the edge of the field. The first few rows swayed with the wind, but the movement felt too strong, almost like someone was pushing through. I yelled, "Hello? Is anyone out there?" My voice sounded shaky. Nobody answered. The wind picked up and the corn rustled louder. I stood there, unsure if I should go in or wait. Then I saw a quick motion near the center, like something had just moved or spun around. The scarecrow's shape appeared to shift from one side to the other. My chest tightened. I tried to listen carefully. I thought I heard a faint murmur, but it was impossible to understand. My hand holding the flashlight started to tremble. Then everything went silent except for my own breathing. I backed up, locked the house door, and sat on a kitchen chair, staring at the door. I stayed awake until dawn. When the first light came through the windows, I got up and went straight to the field. My legs felt stiff, and my eyes were sore from lack of sleep. The air had that early morning chill, and I could see dew on the corn leaves. I walked to the scarecrow's post. It looked taller, or maybe it was just the angle of the light. The hat was definitely pointed in my direction again. The arms hung awkwardly, like they'd been pulled downward. Some straw protruded from the scarecrow's sides like the fabric had been ripped open. The ground around it was disturbed with shallow marks in the dirt that looked fresh. I bent down and touched one of them. It looked like a drag mark, but I couldn't tell what made it. I searched around the area but didn't find anything else. My heart felt heavy, and I kept glancing at the scarecrow's face. The stitches on the mouth seemed looser, like the mouth was partially open now. I stepped back and stared at it. Then I shook my head and walked back to the house. I decided to spend the day doing chores to distract myself. I cleaned out the barn, stacked some hay bales, and sorted the tools that had been left behind. I worked for hours, only stopping for a quick lunch. The physical labor helped me keep my mind off the scarecrow. But late in the afternoon, I realized I'd have to face it again at night. I felt my stomach twist. I remembered how my flashlight beam shook in my hands the night before. I decided to check the field again before sunset, hoping to confirm everything was normal. I walked out there with a steady pace, trying to keep calm. The sun was still up, shining through the tall corn. When I reached the center, I froze. The scarecrow was leaning forward, almost off the post, as if it had tried to climb down. Its arms were stretched forward. The fabric around the shoulders was torn. The rope that tied it to the post was still there, but it was slack. I could see fresh straw on the ground. My throat went dry. I circled around, keeping a few feet of distance. The backside of the scarecrow had long scratches or cuts in the fabric. It wasn't just normal wear. It looked like someone had deliberately cut it open. Pieces of straw stuck out at odd angles. I heard my own heartbeat in my ears. I felt sweat running down my back. I wanted to tear it down, but I hesitated. I wasn't sure if that would cause more trouble. The idea that maybe some drifter was sneaking around at night, tampering with it, crossed my mind. It seemed more plausible than the scarecrow actually moving on its own. I told myself to be logical. It had to be someone messing around. I marched back to the barn and grabbed some rope. I returned to the scarecrow and tightened it securely around the post, binding the torso and arms so it couldn't move if the rope was cut loose. I tied it so firmly that the wood creaked. Then I stood back and felt a small sense of relief, like I'd taken control of the situation. I forced a laugh, though it sounded hollow. Night fell again. I kept the porch light on. I placed a big flashlight and a hammer near the back door. I didn't want to be unprepared. I locked all the windows and double-checked the doors. Around 9, I heard the wind pick up. I braced myself for the rustling. At first, it was just the usual gentle sound. Then it grew louder. The porch light flickered. I listened closely. I heard what sounded like scraping, as if something was dragging along the ground out there. I felt a heavy pressure in my chest. I forced myself to stay calm. I walked to the window and peeked outside. I could see the corn stalks bending in the wind. The scarecrow should have been somewhere in the center, but I couldn't see it from my vantage point. I swallowed hard. My pulse was steady but fast. Then I heard a thud, the same kind I heard the previous night. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped onto the porch, leaving the door open behind me. My boots felt heavy against the old wood. The light illuminated the first few rows. I took a few steps forward, shining the beam into the dark. The corn stalks rustled on both sides. I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. My mouth felt dry, and every muscle in my body tensed. Then I heard a faint creaking sound like rope straining. I moved the flashlight beam around slowly. Something moved to my left. I turned the light there, but it was just a row of swaying stalks. Then I caught a glimpse of the scarecrow's post deeper in the field, but the scarecrow wasn't upright on it. The rope dangled from the post, swinging back and forth. Bits of straw clung to it. I felt my blood run cold. I could see movement about 20 feet away. A shape was crouched low among the rows. I couldn't make it out clearly. It was dark and it moved behind the stalks. I inched forward, one step at a time. The wind roared in my ears. My heartbeat throbbed in my temples. I tripped over a loose piece of wood in the ground and nearly fell. My flashlight beam jerked up and down. By the time I steadied it, I saw nothing but the swaying corn. The rope on the post had stopped moving. I felt the urge to run back to the house, but I forced myself to keep the flashlight pointed forward. I scanned the area. The shape was gone. My hands were shaking. I whispered, "Who's out there?" My voice cracked. No one responded. I heard only the wind. I slowly backed away, keeping the light on the field. I turned once I reached the yard and hurried into the house, shutting the door behind me. My breaths were coming fast. My hands were sweaty, and my legs felt weak. I locked the door, turned off the lights, and moved to a window that overlooked the field. I stood behind the curtains, peering out into the darkness. The cornfield was mostly still, except for the occasional gust that made the stalks sway. The scarecrow was nowhere to be seen on its post. I waited there for what felt like hours. Occasionally I'd see a slight movement, but I couldn't be sure if it was the wind or something else. My lungs felt tight. My mind raced with questions about who or what was messing with that scarecrow. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room, holding the flashlight, straining to hear anything unusual. My body was on edge. Every creak of the old house made me jump. Around sunrise, I went back to the window. The field looked normal in the early light. I walked outside with trembling steps. The post in the center of the field stood empty. There were scraps of fabric on the ground. The rope lay torn. Some of the straw was scattered around, clinging to the leaves of the corn plants. The scarecrow was gone. The only signs of it were these scraps and the old hat lying in the dirt. It had a fresh tear along the brim. I leaned down, picked it up, and felt my stomach churn. It smelled musty, and the straw inside it was damp. Something about it felt wrong in my hand. I didn't see footprints, but the ground was disturbed, like someone had dragged something through there. I've lived here ever since, and I still work the fields, but I always keep my eyes open. I never found the rest of that scarecrow. I don't know if someone took it or if it walked away on its own. I can't explain the noises, the movement, or the footprints. I tried to brush it off as trespassers playing pranks, but I haven't seen anyone lurking around, and nothing else has been taken. I keep thinking about that shape in the corn, crouched low, watching me. I don't go into the field at night anymore. I can't ignore the feeling that something out there had its eyes on me. Now every time the wind rustles through the rows, I feel my heart pound. I stand on the porch sometimes, scanning the stalks, expecting to see that shape again. I haven't yet, but I can't shake the tension in my gut. I don't know what's out there, but I'm not going to look for it. Not in the dark. If it comes back, I'll deal with it then. Until that day, I live with that memory. The torn rope, the scraps of fabric, and the missing scarecrow that once stood in the center of my field. I knew something was off the moment I stepped onto this land. The property looked ordinary from the outside, just a rundown farmhouse and some overgrown fields. But when I found those tunnels on my second day here, I felt a knot in my stomach that hasn't gone away since. Nothing about them shows up in the county records, and nobody in town seems to know they exist. Now I'm stuck trying to make sense of something that never stays the same from one day to the next. I'm a pretty straightforward guy. I bought this property for the peace and quiet. I wanted space to work on my projects without neighbors breathing down my neck. But on that second day, I noticed a collapsed bit of dirt in the small barn out back. It didn't look like a normal sinkhole. The soil was too loose, and when I cleared away a bit more, I found an entrance to what looked like a hand-dug passage. It was bigger than I expected, wide enough to walk through if I kept my head down. At first, I didn't even plan to go in. It felt weird, though. There was a draft pushing out from inside like a subtle breeze, but the air smelled stale. I got this unpleasant taste in my mouth, but I couldn't pull myself away. I grabbed a flashlight and a simple dust mask from my truck. I told myself I'd just take a quick look. That was a mistake. When I climbed down, the temperature dropped. The tunnel walls were rough, cut right into the earth with no sign of modern supports or reinforcements. My flashlight beam only reached so far, so I felt like I was stepping into total blackness beyond that circle of light. My breath sounded louder than usual, and every time I moved, I heard an echo that didn't match my footsteps. It was almost like someone else was walking behind me, trying to imitate every movement. I kept looking back, and I got jumpy each time. My heart was pounding. That feeling reminded me of being in a basement with the lights off as a kid, but I shook it off. I told myself there had to be a logical reason for that echo. Maybe the tunnel had some strange acoustics. Whatever the explanation, I couldn't relax. After walking about 30 yards, I noticed the walls weren't all natural dirt. Some parts had brick sections that were crumbling, and some had stones fitted together like a rough foundation. There were markings on them, small inscriptions I couldn't read. They looked like random scratches at first, but as I ran my hand over them, they felt too uniform. Some had shapes like triangles or circles. I tried to take photos with my phone, but the signal was gone and the pictures came out blurry, even though I swear my camera usually works fine in low light. I felt a twinge of frustration but kept going. I reached a split in the tunnel. One branch sloped down and the other turned left. My flashlight started to flicker. I smacked it a few times, trying to keep it from dying. My nerves were shot, and I decided I'd better get out while I still had a light source. But right when I turned around, I felt a cold draft on my neck. It was like breath, but nobody was there. I spun around with the flashlight, but I only saw empty tunnel. That made my knees feel weak. I backed away and made my way toward the entrance. Climbing out was a relief. The sunlight stung my eyes, but at least it felt real. My clothes were covered in dirt and I was sweating, even though it was cool down there. I spent the rest of that evening trying to figure out who could have built those passages. I checked the county archives, but I found nothing. I asked a neighbor I'd met in town. He gave me a strange look and told me he never heard of anything like that. Then he changed the subject. I slept poorly that night, half expecting to hear strange noises under the floor. The next morning, I bought some better gear: a stronger flashlight, extra batteries, a lantern, a few rope markers, and a notebook so I could map out my path. It felt like overkill, but I wanted some control over this. I went back to the barn and slipped down the hole, ignoring that lingering dread in my chest. The main tunnel looked the same at first. The air felt heavy, and I could taste dust. My own breathing sounded strained. I stuck my lantern in the ground near the entrance so I'd have a beacon. Then I used the rope to create a line along the wall, hoping I could trace my way back more easily. At least that was my plan. But about 15 minutes in, I reached a place that had definitely changed. The intersection was gone. Instead, the tunnel curved gently to the right. That made no sense. The day before, I had seen a slope heading downward and a left turn. Now there was just a single path. My rope was leading into this new corridor like it had always been there. My skin started tingling and my hands got clammy. I didn't understand how a tunnel could just rearrange itself. I tried not to panic. I kept going, shining my flashlight on the walls, looking for those old inscriptions. I found more of them about 10 feet ahead. They were carved deeper than the ones I'd seen before, and they looked more elaborate. I put my hand on one set of marks and felt small ridges like it was fresh. My rope line felt stable in my hand though, so I forced myself to continue. After a while, I felt a new draft. It kept shifting temperatures, warm for a few seconds, then cold. It brushed over my arms like a breeze in a cave. The hair on the back of my neck stood up when I heard something that sounded like my name. It was a low whisper, so soft I almost doubted I heard it. But it repeated, "Adam," in a faint hiss. My gut twisted, and I pointed my flashlight around, but there was no one else down there. I called out, "Who's there?" My voice echoed in a strange way, bouncing back in overlapping layers. I waited, heart pounding, but I heard no response except more whispers, too faint to make out. I was sweating through my shirt, and my breathing turned shallow. I considered leaving, but something kept me moving forward. It was like an itch in my mind that demanded answers. By the time I reached what looked like a small chamber, I had used a third of my rope. The space was maybe 10 feet wide with a low ceiling. My flashlight revealed more of those markings on every wall. They circled around the room, forming rows of odd shapes. I saw the same triangles, circles, and some jagged patterns that reminded me of letters, but I couldn't read them. My chest tightened when I saw the floor in one corner was darker, as if something had seeped through the dirt. It wasn't fresh liquid, more like a permanent stain. I touched it with a gloved hand, but I couldn't tell if it was oil or something else. While I was kneeling, my flashlight caught something on the other side of the chamber. Another tunnel opening led deeper. I stood up, feeling that sense of being watched again. The lantern was too far away to help, so I was relying on the flashlight alone. It flickered once more. I tapped it. The beam steadied, but I felt my pulse jump. I tried to mark the chamber on my map. I had the notebook with me, so I sketched out the path. It wasn't fancy, just a rough line showing the distance and direction. But my sense of direction kept failing. It felt like the hallway had twisted around me at least once. I tried to recall each turn, but I couldn't. My memory felt scrambled. I took a moment to breathe, focusing on the facts. I came in from the north side. I took a right turn. Or was it 2 right turns? My head started to pound. My hand shook when I wrote a note on the page. It felt pointless, but I did it anyway. Then I heard a clicking sound behind me. It was like nails tapping on stone, faint but rhythmic. I whipped around with the flashlight, shining it all over the walls. There was no one. The clicking stopped, replaced by that same heavy silence. I felt sweat trickling down my neck. My mouth was dry, and my heartbeat was drumming in my ears. I decided to trace my rope back and get out. This was getting too intense. The tension in my shoulders was almost unbearable. I followed the rope for maybe 5 minutes, but it led me to a dead end, a wall of dirt where there hadn't been one before. I shone my light across it, searching for any kind of opening, but it looked solid. I tugged on the rope. It went right into the wall. I felt a spike of panic. This didn't make sense. I pulled harder, and part of the rope came loose from behind the dirt. It slid out easily, like it wasn't even tied to anything on the other side. I shouted in frustration. My voice echoed weirdly again. The rope was useless now. The tunnel behind me had changed shape, like it sealed itself up. I had no choice but to try another path. My instincts told me to keep calm, so I took a few sips of water from my canteen and forced myself to breathe slowly. My heart was pounding like a drum. I moved back toward the chamber and took the other opening, shining my flashlight on every inch of wall I passed, looking for an exit or a sign of fresh air. My shoulders twitched whenever I heard the echoes. They always seemed a half-second off, like they weren't matching my footsteps. I caught a whiff of something metallic in the air. It reminded me of rusty iron. My stomach churned, but I pressed on. After walking maybe another 10 minutes, I reached a low passage that forced me to duck. The ceiling was only 5 feet high, and the ground was uneven. My knees shook, and my breathing got shallow again, but I kept going. Every so often I'd run my free hand along the wall, feeling the rough texture of dirt and stone. In some places it was damp, like groundwater had seeped through. The cold moisture made my fingertips go numb. Eventually, I turned a corner and spotted a faint light. It wasn't natural sunlight. It was more like a pale glow, almost bluish. I clicked off my flashlight for a second to check if I was imagining it. The glow remained, flickering softly around another bend. My heart felt like it was about to jump out of my chest, but I was too curious to turn back. I followed that glow until I reached a small alcove. The source was a tiny crack in the wall, maybe an inch wide. It looked like someone had placed a glass shard or a crystal inside the crack that emitted this faint radiance. I reached out to touch it, but I hesitated. The light moved for a second, like it pulsed. My skin prickled. I left it alone and stepped back, shining my flashlight to see if there was any way forward. There was a narrow side passage that I hadn't noticed before. It was so tight I'd have to squeeze through sideways. I felt a surge of claustrophobia. My chest felt too tight already. I pictured myself getting stuck, but I didn't see any other option. The corridor behind me led nowhere except that sealed dead end. I needed to keep going, or I'd never find a way out. I inched into the passage, pressing my shoulders against the walls. My flashlight flickered again, and I cursed under my breath. The beam kept dimming. I heard a rumble in the distance, like rocks shifting. The ground under me vibrated for a second. Fear washed over me, but I forced my body forward. The air smelled stale, and dust coated my tongue. My arms felt weak, and my legs felt heavy. I almost dropped my flashlight when I slipped on loose dirt, but I caught myself. The narrow passage opened into another area with a slightly higher ceiling. I straightened up and looked around, shining my light across the walls. I recognized some of the same inscriptions, except they looked bigger and deeper, like they'd been carved with more force. There was a sense of pressure in my ears, almost like I was too far underground. I swallowed hard, trying to pop my ears, and it helped a little. Then I heard that whisper again, close to my ear. It said my name in a slow hiss. I spun around, yelling, "Stop!" My voice cracked. I saw nothing but darkness. My flashlight fell on a strange pattern of scuff marks on the ground, like something had been dragged along the dirt. My heartbeat hammered. The hair on my arms stood straight. I inched away from those marks and scanned the corridor for any sign of an exit. That's when I noticed a faint draft brushing against my face from the right. It felt cleaner, like fresher air. I headed that way, not caring if it was dangerous. I just wanted out. I followed that airflow until I came across a slope that angled upward. It was steep, and I had to dig my hands into the soil to climb. Dirt crumbled under my feet, and a couple of times I slid back, scraping my elbows. My flashlight was in my mouth so I could use both hands. It tasted bitter. Every muscle in my body was tense, but I pushed myself, desperate to see daylight or at least find some open space. At the top, there was a small opening. I could see a sliver of light. It was definitely daylight, though filtered through a thick layer of roots and vegetation. I felt a surge of relief. I scrambled forward, not caring if I tore my clothes or cut my hands. When I finally poked my head through, I saw the bottom of a small ravine near the edge of my property. I dragged myself out, panting hard. My shirt was soaked with sweat, and my legs felt like jelly. I stayed there on my knees for a while, just catching my breath and trying to slow my pounding heart. When I gathered myself enough to stand, I realized I was far from the barn. I recognized some of the surrounding trees, but I was at least half a mile from the house. I couldn't figure out how I had traveled that distance underground. I looked back at the hole I'd crawled out of. It was partly concealed by brambles. Inside, there was only darkness. No sign of a direct path. Everything felt distorted, like the tunnels had shifted again the moment I left. I walked back to the house on shaky legs, flinching at every rustle of leaves. My mind kept replaying that whisper and the weird echoes. When I reached my front porch, I realized I was still gripping the flashlight like it was the only thing keeping me sane. I had dirt in my hair and under my nails. My throat was dry and scratchy, and my voice felt raw when I whispered, "What the hell is going on down there?" I'm telling this because I can't keep it to myself anymore. Every time I go back, the layout changes. I've tried mapping it, but my sketches never match what I find the next day. I've left markers that vanish or move to different tunnels. I hear my name whispered in the dark, and I sense someone or something following me. The air is always heavy, and my flashlight rarely works for long. I'm on edge, barely sleeping, thinking about what might be under my feet. This place is more than just a bunch of old tunnels. It feels alive, and it wants me to keep coming back. I wish I could walk away, but it's my land now. I'm stuck with it, and it seems determined to let me know I'm not here alone.